Leave immediately. One flyer to Arakan, and no personal items. They fly light and as fast as possible. I want them there before tomorrow night. The other Morarakan will travel with the groundlings. I hope to be leaving in a few hours. Have them assembled and ready. Carts, Perrin said. Neil could not make a gateway large enough to accommodate a wagon. Whatever they bring has to be in carts, not wagons. Balloon mouthed the word incredulously. Carts, Tally agreed. See to it, Captain. Perrin could smell an eagerness in the man that he interpreted as a desire to ask questions. But all Falun said, bowing, was, As you command, Gunner General, so shall it be done. The outer room was in a different sort of turmoil when they left the captain. Clerks darted everywhere, sweeping frantically or beating at the remaining beetles with their brooms. Some of the women wept as they wielded their brooms. Some of the men looked as though they wanted to, and the room was still rank with terror. There was no sign of the dead man, but Aaron noticed that the clerks moved around the place where he had lain, refusing to let a foot touch it. They tried not to step on any beetles either, which made for considerable dancing about on their toes. When Perrin crunched his way toward the outer door, they stopped to stare at him. Outside, the mood was calmer, but not by much. Tavi's soldiers still stood by their horses in a row, and Neil was affecting an air of casual indifference, even to yawning and patting his mouth. But the Suldam was petting the trembling Demani and murmuring soothingly, and the blue-coated soldiers, many more than had been there before, stood in a large cluster talking worriedly. The Kyrianan and Tyrans rushed to surround Perrin, leading their horses and all talking at once. Is it true, my lord? Kamile asked, her pale face twisted with worry, and her brother Barmanis said uneasily. 4 men carried out something in a blanket, but they averted their eyes from whatever it was. All of them atop one another, all smelling of near panic. They said he spewed beetles, and they said the beetles chewed their way out of him, and the light help us, they're sweeping beetles out of the door. We'll all be killed, and burn my soul, it's the Dark One breaking free. And more that made less sense. Be quiet, Perrin said, and for a wonder they fell silent. Usually they were very prickly with him, insisting that they served Bail, not him. Now they stood staring at him, waiting for him to put their fears to rest. A man did spew up beetles and die, but they're ordinary beetles you can find in dead timber anywhere. Give you a nasty pinch if you sit on one, but nothing worse. Likely it was the Dark One's work somehow, true enough, but it has nothing to do with freeing the Lady Fail, and that means it has nothing to do with us. So calm yourselves, and let's get on about our business. Strangely, it worked. More than one cheek reddened, and the smell of fear was replaced, or at least suppressed, by the scent of shame at letting themselves come so near to panic.
Hey, Fire, how you doing?
As they began mounting, their own natures reasserted themselves, though. First one, then another offered boasts
just 1 second, we'll roll one up and do a dab.
Each wilder than the next. They knew them for wild because each boast brought laughter from the others, yet the next always tried to make his more outrageous still. The Banner General was watching him again, he realized as he took Stayer's reins from Karlon. What did she see? What did she think she might learn? What sent all the Rocken away? He asked. We should have come here second or third, she replied, swinging up into her saddle. I still have to acquire Adam. I wanted to keep believing I had a chance as long as I could, but we might as well get to the heart. That piece of paper faces a real test now, and if it fails, there's no point going after Adam. A frail alliance and small trust. Why should it fail? It worked here. Balloon's a soldier, my lord. Now we must talk with an imperial functionary. She imbued that last word with a wealth of scorn. She turned her bay, and he had no choice but to mount and follow. Almazar was a considerable town and prosperous, with 6 tall watchtowers around its edge, but no wall. Elias had Amadisian law for bad walls anywhere save Amador. a law made at the behest of the white cloaks and enforced by them as much as by whoever held the throne. Bulwer would no doubt learn who that might be now, with Iron dead. The streets were paved with granite blocks and lined with solid buildings of brick or stone, some gray, some black, many 3 or 4 stories high, and most roofed in dark slate, the rest in thatch. People filled the streets, dodging between wagons and horse carts and hand carts, hawkers crying their wares, women in deep bonnets that hid their faces carrying shopping baskets, men in knee-length coats striding along self-importantly, apprentices in aprons or vests running errands. As many soldiers walked the streets as locals, men and women, with skin as dark as any tyrant, skin the color of honey, men as pale as Carianan but fair-haired and tall, all in brightly colored Chonchan uniforms. Most wore no more than a belt knife or dagger, but he saw some with swords. They walked in pairs, watchful of everyone around them, and had truncheons at their belts too. A town watch, he supposed, but a lot of them for a place the size of Almazar. He never had fewer than 2 of those pairs in his sight. 2 men and a woman came out of a tall, slate-roofed inn and mounted horses held by grooms. He knew her for a woman only by the way her long, split-tailed coat fit over her bosom, because her hair was cut shorter than the men's, and she wore men's clothing and a sword just like the other 2. Her face was certainly as hard as theirs. As the 3 cantered off west down the street, Mishima grunted sourly. "Hunters for the horn," he muttered. "My eyes if they're not. Those fine fellows cause trouble everywhere they go, getting in fights, sticking their noses where they don't belong. I've heard the horn of Valir has already been found. What do you think, my lord?" "I've heard it's been found too," Aaron replied cautiously. "There are all sorts of rumors floating about." Neither one so much as glanced at him, and in the middle of a crowded street catching their sense was well nigh impossible. Yet for some reason he thought they were mulling over his answer, as if it had hidden depths. Like, could they think he was tied up with the horn? He knew where it was. Moraine had carried it off to the White Tower. He was not about to tell them, though. Small trust worked both ways. The local people gave the soldiers no more heed than they did each other, nor the Banner General and her armored followers. But Perrin was another matter, at least when they noticed his golden eyes. He could tell instantly when someone did. The quick jerk of a woman's head, her mouth falling open as she stared. The man who froze, gaping at him. One fellow actually tripped over his own boots and stumbled to his knees. That one stared, then scrambled to his feet and ran, pushing people from his path as though fearful Perrin might pursue him. "I suppose he never saw yellow eyes on a man before," Perrin said wryly. "Are they common where you come from?" the Banner General asked. "Not common, I wouldn't say that. But I'll introduce you to another man who has them." She and Mishima exchanged glances. Like, he hoped there was nothing in the prophecies about 2 men with yellow eyes. Those colors whirled, and he dashed them. The Banner General knew exactly where she was going, a stone stable on the southern edge of the town, but when she dismounted in the empty stable yard, no groom came rushing out. A stone-faced paddock stood next to the stable, but it held no horses. She handed her reins to one of her soldiers and stood staring at the stable doors, only one of which was open. By her scent, Perrin thought she was stealing herself. "Follow my lead, my lord," she said finally, "and don't say anything you don't have to. It might be the wrong thing. If you must speak, speak to me. Make it clear you're speaking to me." That sounded ominous, but he nodded, and began planning how to steal the fork root if things went wrong. He would need to learn whether the place was guarded at night. Bulwer might already know. The little man seemed to pick up information like that without trying. When he followed her inside, Mishima remained with the horses, and looking relieved not to accompany them. What did that mean? Or did it mean anything? Shan. In just a few days, they had him seeing hidden meanings in everything. The place had been a stable once, obviously, but now it was something else. The stone floor had been swept clean enough to satisfy any farm wife. There were no horses, and a thick smell like mint would have overwhelmed the remaining scent of horse and hay to any nose but his or Elias's. The stalls at the front were filled with stacked wooden crates, and in the back, the stalls had been removed except for the uprights that supported the loft. Now men and women were working back there, some using mortars and pestles or sieves at tables, others carefully tending flat pans, sitting on metal legs above charcoal braziers, using tongs to turn what appeared to be roots. A lean young man in his shirt sleeves put a plump jute bag into one of the crates, then bowed to Tylee as deeply as the clerk had, body parallel to the floor. He did not straighten until she spoke. "Banner General Kiergan, I wish to speak with whoever is in charge, if I may." Her tone was much different than it had been with the clerk, not peremptory at all. "As you command," the lean fellow replied in what sounded an Amadisian accent. At least if he were Sean-Chan, he spoke at a proper speed and without chewing his words. Bowing again, just as deeply, he hurried to where 6 stalls had been walled in, halfway down the left-hand row, and tapped diffidently at a door, then waited permission before going in. When he came out, he went to the back of the building without so much as a glance toward Perrin and Tylee. After a few minutes, Perrin opened his mouth, but Tylee grimaced and shook her head. So he
I was able to get a little bit of dabs today. Not much like I usually. I was only able to get a couple grams at the dispensary. I usually get my dabs
At last, a sleekly plump woman in a deep yellow dress of odd cut came out of the small room, but she paused to study the work going on in the back of the building, ignoring Tylee and him. Half of her scalp had been shaved bald. The remaining hair was in a thick, graying braid that hung to her shoulder. Finally, she nodded in satisfaction and made her unhurried way to them. An oval blue panel on her bosom was embroidered with 3 golden hands. Tylee bowed as deeply as Falloon had for her, and remembering her admonition, Perrin did the same. The sleek woman inclined her head. Slightly. She smelled of pride. "You wish to speak with me, Banner General?" She had a smooth voice, as sleek as herself, and not welcoming. She was a busy woman being bothered, a busy woman well aware of her own importance. "Yes, Honorable," Tylee said respectfully. A spike of irritation appeared among her smell of patience, then was swallowed again. Her face remained expressionless. "Will you tell me how much prepared fork fruit you have on hand?" "An odd request," the other woman said, as though considering whether to grant it. She tilted her head and thought. "Very well," she said after a moment. "As of the mid-morning accounting, I have 4,873 pounds, 9 ounces. A remarkable achievement, if I do say it myself, considering how much I have shipped off and how hard it is getting to find the plant in the wild without sending diggers unreasonable distances." Impossible as it seemed, the pride in her sense deepened. "I've solved that problem, however, by inducing the local farmers to plant some of their fields in fork root. By this summer, I will need to build something bigger to house this manufactory. I'll confide in you. I will not be surprised if I am offered a new name for this, though of course I may not accept." Smiling a small, sleek smile, she touched the oval panel lightly, but it was near a caress. "The light will surely favor you, Honorable," Tylee murmured. "My lord, will you do me the favor of showing your document to the Honorable?" That would have bowed to Perrin, markedly lower than the one she had offered the Honorable. The sleek woman's eyebrows twitched. Reaching out to take the paper from his hand, she froze, staring at his face. She had finally noticed his eyes. Giving herself a small shake, she read without any outward expression of surprise, then folded the paper up again and stood tapping it against her free hand. "It seems you walk the heights, Banner General, and with a very strange companion. What aid do you or he ask of me?" "Fork root, Honorable," Tylee said mildly. All that you have, loaded into carts as soon as possible. And you must provide the carts and drivers as well, I fear. Impossible, the sleek woman snapped, drawing herself up haughtily. I have established strict schedules as to how many pounds of prepared for food are shipped every week, which I have adhered to rigidly, and I'll not. The harm to the Empire would be immense. The Suldam are snapping up the money on every hand. Forgiveness, Honorable, Ali said, bowing again. If you could see your way clear to let us have Banner General, Baron
Hands hurting today.
Plainly, this was a touchy encounter. He tried to keep his face smooth, but he could not avoid a frown. He could not be certain that even near 5 tons of the stuff would be sufficient, and she was trying to negotiate some lesser weight. His mind raced, trying to find a way. Vast thought was shoddy thought, in his estimation. It led to mistakes and accidents, but he had no choice. This may not interest the Honorable, of course, but Seraph promised death and worse if there was any hindrance to her plans. I don't suppose her anger will go beyond you and me, but she did say to take it all. Of course, the Honorable will not be touched by the High Lady's anger. Sally sounded as though she was not sure of that. The sleek woman was breathing hard, the blue oval with the golden hands heaving. She bowed to Baron deeply as Tylee had.
Almost
I
fell.
need most of the day to gather enough carts and drop them. Will that suffice, my lord? It will have to, won't it? Baron said, plucking the note from her hand. She let go reluctantly and watched hungrily as he tucked it into his coat pocket. Outside, the Banner General shook her head as she swung into the saddle. Dealing with the lesser hands is always difficult. None of them see anything lesser in themselves. I thought this would be in the charge of someone of the 4th or 5th rank, and that would have been hard enough. When I saw that she was of the 3rd rank, only 2 steps below a hand to the Empress herself, may she live forever, I was sure we wouldn't get away with more than a few £100, if that. But you handled it beautifully. A risk taken, but still beautifully managed. Well, nobody wants to chance death, Perrin said as they started out of the stable yard into the town, with everyone strung out behind them. Now they had to wait for the carts, perhaps find an inn. Impatience burned in him. The light said they did not need to spend the night. You didn't know, the dark woman breathed. That woman knew she stood in the shadow of death as soon as she read Seraph's words, but she was ready to risk it to do her duty to the Empire. A lesser hand of the 3rd rank is standing enough that she might well escape death on the plea of duty done. But you used Seraph's name. That's all right most of the time, except when addressing the High Lady herself, of course. But with a lesser hand, using her name without her title meant you were either an ignorant local or an intimate of Seraph herself. The light favored you, and she decided you were an intimate. Perrin barked a mirthless laugh. Sean Chan. And maybe to Viren, too. Tell me, if the question does not offend, did your lady bring powerful connections, or perhaps great lands? That surprised him so much that he twisted in his saddle to stare at her. Something hit his chest hard, sliced a line of fire across his chest, punched his arm. Behind him, a horse squealed in pain. Stunned, he stared down at the arrow sticking through his left arm. Mishima, the Banner General snapped, pointing. That 4-story building with the thatched roof, between 2 slate roofs. I saw movement on the rooftop. Shouting a command to follow, Mishima galloped off down the crowded street with 6 of the Shonchan lancers, horseshoes ringing on the paving stones. People leapt out of their way. Others stared.
No one
on the street seemed to realize what had happened. 2 of the other lancers were out of their saddles, tending the trembling mount of one that had an arrow jutting from its shoulder. Perrin fingered a broken button, hanging by a thread. The silk of his coat was slashed from the button across his chest. Blood oozed, dampening his shirt, trickled down his arm. Had he not twisted just at that moment, that arrow would have been through his heart instead of his arm. Maybe the other would have hit him as well, but the one would have done the job. A two-river shaft would not have been deflected so easily. Kyrianen and Tyrans crowded around him as he dismounted, all of them trying to help him, which he did not need. He drew his belt knife, but Kamail took it from him and deftly scored the shaft so she could break it cleanly just above his arm. That sent a jolt of pain down his arm. She did not seem to mind getting blood on her fingers, just plucking a lace-edged handkerchief from her sleeve, a paler green than usual for Kyrianen, and wiping them, then examined the end of the shaft sticking out of his arm to make sure there were no splinters. The banner general was down off her bay too, and frowning. My eyes are lowered that you have been injured, my lord. I'd heard that there had been an increase in crime of late. Arsons, robbers killing when there was no need, murders done for no reason anyone knows. I should have protected you better. Grit your teeth, my lord, Barmonis said, tying a length of leather cord just above the arrowhead. Are you ready, my lord? Perrin tightened his jaw and nodded, and Barmonis jerked the blood-stained shaft free. Perrin stifled a groan. Your eyes aren't lowered, he said hoarsely, whatever that meant. It did not sound good the way she said it. Nobody asked you to wrap me in swaddling. I certainly never did. Neil pushed through the crowd surrounding Perrin, his hands already raised, but Perrin waved him away. Not here, man. People can see. Folk in the street had finally noticed and were gathering to watch, murmuring excitedly to one another. He can heal this so you'd never know I was hurt, he explained, flexing his arm experimentally. He winced. That had been a bad idea. You'd let him use the one power on you? Kylie said disbelievingly. To be rid of a hole in my arm and a slice across my chest? As soon as we're somewhere half the town isn't staring at us, wouldn't you? She shivered and made a peculiar gesture again. I was going to have to ask her what that meant. Ursula joined them, leading his horse and looking grave. 2 men fell from that roof with bows and critters, he said quietly. But it wasn't that fall that killed them. They hit the pavement hard, yet there was hardly any blood. I think they took poison when they saw they'd failed to kill you. That doesn't make any sense, Graham muttered. If men will kill themselves rather than report failure, he said gravely, it means you have a powerful enemy. A powerful enemy? Very likely Massima would like to see it dead, but there was no way Massima's reach could extend this far. Any enemies I have are far away and don't know where I am. Kylie and Nishima agreed that he must know about that, but they looked doubtful. Then again, there were always there. Some of them had tried to kill him before. Others had tried to use him. He did not think he was going to bring the Forsaken into the discussion. His arm was throbbing, the cut on his chest, too. Let's find an inn where I can hire a room. 51 knots. How many more? Light. How many more?
Chapter 13. Siege. Push them, Elaine shouted. Fireheart tried to dance, impatient at being crowded in the narrow cobblestone street with other horses and women afoot, but she steadied the black gelding with a firm hand. Birgitta had insisted she remain well back. Insisted, as if she were a brainless fool. Push them, burn you!
Oh, shit. Did a cat get you again?
None of the hundreds of men on the wide guard walk atop the stone wall, white streaked gray stone rearing 50 feet, paid her any heed, of course. It was doubtful they heard her. Amid shouts of their own, curses and screams, the clash of steel rang over the broad street that ran alongside the wall beneath the noonday sun, suspended in a rare, cloudless sky, as those men sweated and killed one another with sword or spear or halberd. The melee spanned 200 paces of the wall, enveloping 3 of the high round towers where the white line of Andor flew, and threatening 2 more, though all still seemed secure, thank the light. Men stabbed and hacked and thrust, no one giving ground or quarter that she could see. Red-coated crossbowmen
That's
atop the
crazy.
towers did their share of killing, but once fired, a crossbow required time to ready for another shot, and they were too few to turn the tide in any case. They were the only guardsmen up there. The rest were mercenaries, save Birgitta. This near, the bond let Elaine's eye find her warder easily, intricate golden braids swaying as she shouted encouragement to her soldiers, pointing her bow to where reinforcement was needed. In her short, white-collared red coat and wide sky-blue trousers tucked into her boots, she alone atop the wall wore no armor of any sort. She had insisted the lane don plain gray in the hope of avoiding notice, and any effort to capture or kill her, some of the men up there had crossbows or short bows slung on their backs, and for those not in the forefront and engaged, 50 paces made an easy shot. But the 4 golden knots of rank on her own shoulder would make Birgitta the target of any of Amarilla's men with eyes. At least she was not actually mingling in the press. At least she... Elaine's breath caught as a wiry fellow in breastplate and conical steel cap lunged at Birgitta with a sword, but the golden-haired woman dodged the thrust calmly. The bond said she might have been out for a hard ride, no more, and a backhand blow with her bow caught the fellow on the side of his head, knocking him from the rampart. He had time to scream before he hit the paving stones with a sickening splat. His was not the only corpse decorating the street. Birgitta said men would not follow you unless they knew you were ready to face the same dangers and hardships they did. But if she thought herself killed with this man-foolishness... Elaine did not realize she had heeled Fireheart forward until Casella seized her bridle. "I am not an idiot, guardswoman, Lieutenant," she said frigidly. "I have no intention of going closer until it is safe." The Arafellan woman jerked her hand back, her face becoming very still behind the face bars of her burnished conical helmet. Instantly, Elaine felt sorry for the outburst. Casella was just doing her job, but she still felt coldly angry, too. She would not apologize. Shame surged as she recognized the sulkiness of her own thoughts. Blood and bloody ashes! But there were times she wanted to slap Rand for planting these babes in her. These days she could not be certain from one moment to the next which way her emotions would leap. Leap they did, however. "If this is what happens to you when you get with child," Avienda said, adjusting the dark shawl looped over her arms, "I think I will never have any." The high-cantled saddle of her dun pushed her bulky Aiel skirts high enough to bare her stockinged legs to the knee, but she showed no discomfort at the display. With the mare standing still, she looked quite at home on a horse. But then Nagini, Daisy in the old tongue, was a gentle, placid animal tending to stoutness. Luckily, Avienda was too ignorant of horses to realize that. Muffled laughter pulled Elaine's head around. The women of her bodyguard, all 21 of them assigned this morning, counting Casella, in polished helmets and breastplates, wore smooth faces. Much too smooth, in fact. Without doubt, they were laughing inside. But the 4 kinswomen standing behind them had hands over their mouths and their heads together. Elise, a pleasant-faced woman normally, with touches of gray in her hair, saw her looking, well, glaring, and rolled her eyes ostentatiously, which set the others off in another round of laughter. Kaiden, a plumply pretty Damani, laughed so hard she had to hold on to Kumiko, though the stout graying woman seemed to be having her own difficulties. Irritation stabbed at Elaine. Not at the laughter. All right, a little at the laughter, and certainly not at the kinswomen. Not very much, at least. They were invaluable. This fight on the wall was not Aramilla's first assault in recent weeks by far. In truth, the frequency was increasing, with 3 or 4 attacks coming some days now. She knew very well that Elaine had insufficient soldiers to hold 6 leagues of wall. Burn her! Elaine was all too aware that she could not even spare trained hands to fit hoardings to all those miles of wall and towers. Untrained hands would only bungle the work. All Aranilla needed was to get enough men across to seize a gate. Then she could bring the battle into the city, where Elaine would be badly outnumbered. The population might rise in her favor, no certain thing, yet that only meant adding to the slaughter. Apprentices and grooms and shopkeepers fighting trained armsmen and mercenaries. Whoever sat on the lion throne then, and very likely that would not be Elaine Trakand. It would be stained red with the blood of Camelin. So apart from holding the gates and leaving watchmen on the towers, she had pulled all of her soldiers back into the inner city, close to the royal palace, and stationed men with looking glasses in the tallest spires of the palace. Whenever a watchman signaled an attack forming, linked kinswomen made gateways to carry soldiers to the spot. They took no part in the fighting, of course. She would not have allowed them to use the power as a weapon, even had they been willing. So far it had worked, though often by a hair. Low Camelin, outside the walls, was a warren of houses, shops, inns, and warehouses that allowed men too close before they were seen. 3 times her soldiers had been forced to fight on the ground inside the wall and to retake at least one wall tower. Bloody work, that. She would have burned Low Camelin to the ground to deny Aramilla's people cover, except that the fire might easily spread inside the walls and spawn a conflagration, spring rains or no spring rains. As it was, every night saw arsons inside the city, and containing those was difficult enough. Besides, people lived in those houses despite the siege, and she did not want to be remembered as the one who had destroyed their homes and livelihoods. No, what nettled her was that she had not thought of using the kin that way earlier. If she had, she would not be saddled with sea folk still, not to mention a bargain that gave up a square mile of Andor. Light! A square mile! Her mother had never given up 1 inch of Andor. Burn her! This siege hardly gave her time to mourn her mother, or Lini, her old nursemaid. Ravine had murdered her mother, and likely Lini had died trying to protect her. White-haired and thin with age, Lini would not have backed down even for one of the Forsaken. But thinking of Lini made her hear the woman's weedy voice. "You can't put honey back in the comb, child." What was done, and she had to live with it. "That's it, then," Casella said. "They're making for the ladders." It was true. All along the wall, Elaine's soldiers were pushing forward, Aramilla's falling back, climbing through the crenels where their ladders were propped. Men still died on the rampart, but the fight was ending. Elaine surprised herself by digging her heels into Fireheart's flanks. No one was quick enough to catch her this time. Pursued by shouts, she galloped across the street and flung herself out of the saddle at the base of the nearest tower before the gelding was fully halted. Pushing open the heavy door, she gathered her divided skirts and raced up the Widdershins' spiraling stairs, past large niches where clusters of armored men stared in amazement as she darted by. These towers were made to be defended against attackers trying to make their way down and into the city. At last, the stairs opened into a large room where stairs on the other side spiraled upward in the opposite direction. 20 men in mismatched helmets and breastplates were taking their ease, tossing dice, sitting against the wall, talking and laughing, as if there were no dead men beyond the room's 2 iron-strap doors. Whatever they were doing, they stopped to gape when she appeared. My lady, I wouldn't do that," a rough voice said as she laid hands on the iron bar across one of the doors. Ignoring the man, she turned the bar on its pivot pin and pushed the door open. A hand caught at her skirt, but she pulled free. None of Aramilla's men remained on the wall, none standing at least. Dozens of men lay on the blood-streaked guard walk, some still, others groaning. Any number of those might belong to Aramilla, but the ringing of steel had vanished. Most of the mercenaries were tending the wounded, or just squatting on their heels to catch their breath. "Shake them off and pull up the bloody ladders," Birgitta shouted. Loosing an arrow into the mass of men trying to flee down the dirt-paved low Camelin street below the wall, she knocked another and fired again. "Make them build more if they want to come again." Some of the mercenaries leaned through crenels to obey, but only a handful. "I knew I shouldn't have let you come along today," she went on, still loosing shafts as fast as she could knock and draw. Crossbow bolts from the tower tops struck down men below as well, but tile-roofed warehouses offered shelter here for any who could get inside. It took a moment for Elaine to realize that last comment had been directed at her, and her face heated. "And how would you have stopped me?" she demanded, drawing herself up. Quiver empty, Birgitta lowered her bow and turned with a scowl. "By tying you up and having her sit on you," she said, nodding toward Avienda, who was striding out of the tower. The glow of Sidar surrounded her, yet her horn-hilted belt knife was in her fist. Casela and the rest of the guardswomen spilled out behind her, swords in hand and faces grim. Seeing Elaine unharmed changed their expressions not a whit. Those bloody women were insufferable when it came to treating her like a blown glass vase that might break at the rap of a knuckle. They would be worse than ever after this, and she would have to suffer it. "I would have caught you," Avienda muttered, rubbing her hip. "Except that fool horse tossed me off." That was highly
Happy
unlikely
420.
with such a placid mare. Avienda had simply managed to fall off. Seeing the situation, she slipped her knife back into its sheath quickly, trying to pretend she had never had it out. The light of Sidar vanished, too. "I was quite safe." Elaine tried to remove the acerbic touch from her voice without much success. "Min said I will bear my babes, sister. Until they're born, no harm can come to me." Avienda nodded slowly, thoughtfully, but Birgitta growled, "I'd just as soon you didn't put her visions to the test. Take too many chances and you might prove her wrong." That was foolish. Min was never wrong. Surely not. "That was Alden Meir's company," a tall mercenary said in lilting if rough Mirandian accents as he removed his helmet to reveal a lean, sweaty face with gray-streaked mustaches waxed to spikes. Priest Abalaman, as he called himself, had eyes like stones and a thin-lipped smile that always seemed a leer. He had been listening to their conversation, and he kept darting his sideways glances at Elaine while he talked to Birgitta. "I recognized him, I did. Good man, he is. I fought alongside him more times than I can remember I have. He'd almost made it to that warehouse door when your arrow took him in the neck, Captain General. A shame, that." Elaine frowned.
My day
"He made
hasn't
his
been too
choice
bad. I
as you
can't
did,
complain
Captain.
too much.
You may regret the death of a friend, but I hope you aren't regretting your choice." Most of the mercenaries she had put out of the city, maybe all, had signed on with Aramilla. Her greatest fear at present was that the woman would succeed in bribing
How's your
companies
day
still
been?
inside the walls. None of the mercenary captains had reported anything, but Mistress Harfor said approaches had been made, including an approach to Abalaman. The Mirandian favored her with his leer and a formal bow, flourishing a cloak he was not wearing. "Oh, I fought against him as often as with, my lady. I'd have killed him, or he'd have killed me, had we come face to face this fine day. More acquaintance than friend, you see. And I'd much rather take gold to defend a wall like this than to attack it." "I noticed some of your men have crossbows on their backs, Captain, but I didn't see any using them." "Not the mercenary way," Birgitta said dryly. Irritation floated in the bond, though whether with Avalaman or Elaine, there was no way to know. The sensation vanished quickly. Birgitta had learned to master her emotions once they discovered how she and Elaine mirrored one another through the bond. Very likely she wished Elaine could do the same, but then so did Elaine. Avalaman rested his helmet on his hip. "You see, my lady, the way of it is, if you press a man too hard when he's trying to get off the field, attempting to ride him down and the like, well, the next time it's you trying to get off the field, he might return the favor. After all, if a man's leaving the field, then he's out of the fight, now isn't he?" "Until he comes back tomorrow," Elaine snapped. "The next time I want to see those crossbows put to work." "As you say, my lady," Abalaman said stiffly, making an equally stiff bow. "If you'll pardon,
How's your day
I must
been,
be
Fire?
seeing to my men." He stalked off without waiting on her pardon, shouting to his men to stir
Nice.
their lazy stumps. "How far can he be trusted?" Elaine asked
We had to wait
softly.
for errands to
"As
come
far
by
as any
late.
mercenary,"
Well, we had to run
Birgitta
around, pay
replied just as
bills.
quietly. "If someone offers him enough
Then we had to wait
gold,
for
it
errands
becomes
to
a
come by,
toss-up
which
price.
they
Not
took a
even Matt
little
Coffin could say
longer.
how they'll land." That was a very odd remark. She wished she knew how Nat was, and dear Tom, and poor little Oliver. Every night she offered prayers that they had escaped the Shonchans safely. There was nothing she could do to help them, though. She had enough on her plate trying to help herself at the moment. "Will he obey me about the crossbows?" Birgitta shook her head, and Elaine sighed. It was bad to give orders that would not be obeyed. It put people in the habit of disobeying. Moving close, she spoke in a near whisper. You look tired, Brigitta. This was nothing for anyone else's ears. Brigitta's face was tight, her eyes haggard. Anyone could see that, but the bond said she
Yeah,
was
it's definitely good that
as
most
had
hated was
days
able to
now.
get his trick right again.
But then Elaine felt that same dragging tiredness, as though her limbs were made of lead. Their bond mirrored more than emotions. You don't have to lead every counterattack yourself. And who else is there? For a moment, weariness larded Brigitta's voice, too, and her shoulders actually slumped. But she straightened quickly and strengthened her tone. It was pure willpower. Elaine could feel it, stone hard in the bond, so hard she wanted to weep. My officers are inexperienced boys, Brigitta went on, or else men who came out of retirement and should still be warming their bones in front of their grandchildren's fireplace. Except for the mercenary captains, anyway. And there isn't one I'd trust without someone looking over his shoulder. Which brings us back to, who else but me? Elaine opened her mouth to argue. Not about the mercenaries. Brigitta had explained about them, bitterly and at great length. At times, mercenaries would fight as hard as any guardsman, but other times they pulled back rather than take too many casualties. Fewer men meant less gold for their next hire unless they could be replaced with men as good. Battles that could have been won had been lost instead because mercenaries left the field to preserve their numbers. They disliked doing it if anybody except their own kind was watching, though. That spoiled their reputation and lowered their hire price. There had to be someone else. She could not afford Birgitta falling over from exhaustion. Light. She wished Gareth Bryn were there. Egwene needed him, but so did she. She opened her mouth, and suddenly rumbling booms crashed from the city behind her. She turned, and her mouth stayed open, gaping in astonishment now. Where moments before there had been clear sky over the inner city, a huge mass of black clouds loomed like sheer-sided mountains, forked lightning slashing down through a gray wall of rain that seemed as solid as the city walls. The gilded domes of the royal palace that should have been glittering in the sun were invisible behind that wall. That torrent fell only over the inner city. Everywhere else the sky remained bright and cloudless. There was nothing natural in that. Amazement lasted only moments, though. That silver-blue lightning, 3-tined, 5-tined, was striking inside Camelin, causing damage and maybe deaths. How had those clouds come to be? She reached to embrace Sidar, to disperse them. The true source slipped away from her, and then again. It was like trying to grasp a bead buried in a pot of grease. Just when she thought she had it, it squirted away. It was like this far too often now. Avienda, will you deal with that, please? Of course, Avienda replied, embracing Sidar easily. Elaine stifled a surge of jealousy. Her difficulty was Rand's bloody fault, not her sister's. And thank you. I need the practice. That was untrue. An attempt to spare her feelings. Avienda began weaving air, fire, water, and earth in complex patterns, and doing so nearly as smoothly as she herself could have, if much more slowly. Her sister lacked her skill with weather, but then she had not had the advantage of seafolk teaching. The clouds did not simply vanish, of course. First the lightnings became single bolts, dwindled in number, then ceased. That was the hardest part. Calling lightning was twirling a feather between your fingers compared to stopping it. That was more like picking up a blacksmith's anvil in your hands. Then the clouds began to spread out, to thin and grow paler. That was slow, too. Doing too much too fast with weather could cause effects that rippled across the countryside for leagues, and you never knew what the effects might be. Raging storms and flash floods were as likely as balmy days and gentle breezes. By the time the clouds had spread far enough to reach the outer walls of Camelin, they were gray, and dropping a steady, soaking downpour that quickly slicked Elaine's curls to her scalp. Is that enough? Smiling, Avienda turned her face up to let the rain run down her cheeks. I love to watch water falling from the sky. Like you'd think she'd had enough of rain. It had rained nearly every bloody day since spring came. It's time to be getting back to the palace, Elaine. Birgitta said, tucking her bowstring into her coat pocket. She had begun unstringing her bow as soon as the clouds began moving toward them. Some of these men need a sister's attention, and my breakfast seems 2 days past. Elaine scowled. The bond carried a wariness that told her all she needed to know. They must return to the palace to get Elaine, in her delicate condition, out of the rain, as if she might melt. Abruptly, she became aware of the groans from the wounded, and her face grew hot. Those men did need a sister's attention. Even if she could hold on to Saidar, the least of their injuries were beyond her modest abilities, and Avienda was no better at healing. Yes, it is time, she said. If only she could get her emotions back under control. Birgitta would be pleased at that, too. Spots of color decorated her cheeks, too, echoes of Elaine's shame. They looked very odd with the frown she wore as she hurried Elaine into the tower. Fireheart and Magine and the other horses were all standing patiently where their reins had been dropped, as Elaine expected. Even Magine was well trained. They had the Wall Street utterly to themselves until Elise and the other kin walked out of the narrower way. There was not a cart or wagon to be seen. Every door in sight was tightly shut, every window curtained, though there might well be no one behind any of them. Most people had had sense enough to leave as soon as they caught a glimmering that hundreds of men were about to start swinging swords in their vicinity. One curtain twitched. A woman's face showed for a moment, then vanished. Some others took ghoulish delight in watching. Talking quietly among themselves, the 4 kinswomen took their places where they had opened their gateway some hours earlier. They eyed the corpses in the street and shook their heads, but these were not the first dead men they had seen. Not one would have been allowed to test for accepted, yet they were calm, sure of themselves, as dignified as sisters despite the rain soaking their hair and dresses. Learning Egwene's plan for the kin to be associated with the tower and a place for Aes Sedai to retire had lessened their fears over their future, especially once they found out that their rule would remain in place, and the former Aes Sedai would have to follow it too. Not all believed. Over the last month, 7 of their number had run away without leaving so much as a note, yet most did, and took strength from belief. Having work to do had restored their pride. Elaine had not realized that had been dented until they stopped seeing themselves as refugees wholly dependent on her. They held themselves straighter now. Worry had vanished from their faces, and they were not so quick to bend their necks for a sister, unfortunately. Though that part of it really had begun earlier. They once had considered Aes Sedai superior to mortal flesh, but had learned to their dismay that the shawl did not make a woman more than she was without it. Elise eyed Elaine, compressing her lips for a moment and adjusting her brown skirts unnecessarily. She had argued against Elaine being allowed to come here, and Birgitta had almost given way. Elise was a forceful woman. "Are you ready for us, Captain General?" she said. "We are," Elaine said, but Elise waited until Birgitta nodded before linking with the other 3 kinswomen. She ignored Elaine after that one glance. Really, Nynaeve should never have begun trying to put some backbone into them, as she had put it. When she could lay hands on Nynaeve again, she was going to have words with the woman. The familiar vertical slash appeared and seemed to rotate into a view of the main stable-yard in the palace, a hole in the air nearly 4 paces by 4. But the view through the opening of the tall arched doors of one of the white marble stables was a little off-center from what she expected. When she rode onto the rain-drenched flagstones of the stable-yard, she saw why. There was another gateway, slightly smaller, open. If you tried to open a gateway where one already existed, yours was displaced just enough that the two did not touch, though the gap between was thinner than a razor's edge. From that other gateway, a twinned column of men seemed to be riding out of the stable-yard's outer wall, curving away to exit the stable-yard through the open iron-strapped gates. Some wore burnished helmet and breastplate or plate and mail, but every man had on the white-collared red coat of the Queen's Guard. A tall, broad-shouldered man with 2 golden knots on the left shoulder of his red coat stood in the rain watching them, helmet balanced on his hip. "That's a sight to soothe sore eyes," Birgitta murmured. Small groups of kinswomen were scouring the countryside for anyone trying to come to Elaine's support, but it was a chancy business. Thus far, the kinswomen had brought word of dozens and dozens of groups trying to find a way into the city, yet they'd only managed to locate 5 bands, totaling fewer than 1,000. Word had spread of how many men Aramilla had around the city, and men supporting Trakand were skittish about being found, about who might do the finding. As soon as Elaine and the others appeared, red-clad grooms with the white line on their left shoulders came running. A scrawny, gap-toothed fellow with a fringe of white hair took Fireheart's bridle, while a lean, graying woman held Elaine's stirrup for her to dismount. Ignoring the downpour, she strode toward the tall man, splashing water with every step. His hair hung every which way over his face, clinging wetly, but she could see he was young, well short of his middle years. "The light shine on you, Lieutenant," she said. "Your name? How many did you bring? And from where?" Through that smaller opening, she could see a line of horsemen extending out of sight among tall trees. Whenever a pair rode through, another appeared at the far end of the column. She would not have believed that many of the guards remained anywhere. "Charles Guybon, my queen," he replied, sinking to one knee and pressing a gauntleted fist to the flagstones. "Captain Kindlin in Arundel gave me permission to try reaching Camelin. That was after we learned Lady Nayan and the others had escaped." Elaine laughed. "Stand, man, stand. I'm not
Hey,
queen yet."
Rapid Burrito, how you doing?
Arundel? There'd never been so many of the guards there. "As you say, my lady," he said as he regained his feet and made a bow that was more proper for the daughter heir. "Can we continue this inside?" Birgitta put in irritably. Guybon took in her coat with its gold stripes on the cuffs and knots of rank and offered a salute that she returned with a quick arm across her chest. If he was surprised to see a woman as Captain General, he was wise enough not to show it. "I'm soaked to the skin, and so are you, Elaine." Avienda was right behind her, shawl wrapped around her head, and not looking so pleased with rain now that her white blouse clung wetly and her dark skirts hung with water. The guardswomen were leading their horses toward one of the stables, except for the 8 who would remain with Elaine until their replacements arrived. Guybon made no comment on them either. A very wise man. Elaine allowed herself to be hustled as far as the simple colonnade that offered entrance to the palace itself. Even here the guardswomen surrounded her, 4 ahead and 4 behind,
Wax on the
so
head
she
of
felt a
it.
prisoner. Once out of the rain, though, she balked. She wanted to know. She tried again to embrace Saidar. Removing the moisture from her clothes would be a simple matter with the power, but the source skittered away once more. Avienda did not know the weave, so they had to stand there dripping. The plain iron stand lamps along the wall were still unlit, and with the rain the space was dim. Guybon raked his hair into a semblance of order with his fingers. Right. He was little short of beautiful. His greenish hazel eyes were tired, but his face seemed steady, smiling. He looked as if he had not smiled in too long. "Captain Kindlin said I could try to find men who'd been discharged by Gabriel, my lady, and they started flocking in as soon as I put out the call. You'd be surprised how many tucked their uniforms into a chest against the day they might be wanted again. A good many carried off their armor, too, which they shouldn't have done, strictly speaking, but I'm glad they did. I feared I'd waited too long when I heard of the siege. I was considering trying to fight my way to one of the city gates when Mistress Zigane and the others found me." A puzzled look came over his face. "She became very upset when I called her Aes Sedai, but that has to be the one power that brought us here." "It was, and she isn't," Elaine said impatiently. "How many, man?" 4,762 of the guards, my lady. And I encountered a number of lords and ladies who were trying to reach Camelin with their armsmen. Be content. I made sure they were loyal to you before I let them join me. There are none from the great houses, but they bring the total near to 10,000, my lady." He said that as if it were of no moment at all. "There are 40 horses fit for riding in the stable. I have brought you 10,000 soldiers." Elaine laughed and clapped her hands in delight. "Wonderful, Captain Guybon! Wonderful!" Aramilla still had her outnumbered, but not so badly as before. "Guardsman lieutenant, my lady. I am a lieutenant." From this moment you are Captain Gaibon. And my second, Birgitta added, at least for the present. You've shown resourcefulness, you're old enough to have experience, and I need both. Gaibon seemed overwhelmed, bowing and murmuring stammered thanks. Well, a man of his age would normally expect to serve at least 10 or 15 more years before being considered for captain, much less second to the captain general, however temporary. And now it's past time for us to be getting into dry clothes, Birgitta continued. Especially you, Elaine. The warder bond carried an implacable firmness that suggested she might try dragging Elaine if she dallied. Temper flared, hot and sharp, but Elaine fought it down. She had nearly doubled the number of her soldiers, and she would not let anything spoil this day. Besides, she wanted dry clothes, too. Chapter 14. Wet Things. Inside, the gilded stand lamps were lit, since daylight never penetrated far into the palace, flames flickering on the lamps that lacked glass mantles. The lamps' mirrors provided a good light in the bustling corridor, though, and bustling it was, with liveried servants scurrying in every direction, or sweeping or mopping. Serving men with the white line on the left breast of their red coats were up on tall ladders taking down the winter tapestries, mainly flowers and scenes of summer, and putting up the spring tapestries, many displaying the colorful foliage of fall. Always 2 seasons ahead, for the majority of the hangings was the custom, to provide a touch of relief from winter's cold or summer's heat, to remind while spring's new growth was on all the trees that the branches would grow bare and the snows come again, to remind when dead leaves were falling and the first snows too, and days grew ever colder, that there would be a spring. There were a few battles among them, showing days of particular glory for Andor, but Elaine did not enjoy looking at those as much as she had as a girl. Still, they had their place now as well, tokens of what battle actually was. The difference between how a child looked at things and a woman did. Glory was always bought with blood. Glory aside, necessary things were often paid for with battle and blood. There were too few servants to carry out such tasks in a timely manner, and a fair number were white-haired pensioners with bent backs who seldom moved quickly in any case. However slow they were, she was glad they had willingly come out of retirement to train those newly hired and take up the slack left by those who had fled while Gabriel reigned, or after Rand took Camelin, else the palace would have taken on the aspect of a barn by this time, a dirty barn. At least all of the winter runners were up off the floors. She left a damp trail behind her on the red and white floor tiles, and with all the spring rains, wet runners would have been sprouting mildew before nightfall. Servants in red and white, hurrying about their duties, looked aghast as they bowed or curtsied, which did nothing for her temper. They did not appear upset to see Avienda or Birgitta drenched and dripping, or the guardswomen either. Burn her if everyone did not stop expecting her to be mollycoddled all the day long. Her scowl was such that the servants began making their courtesies quickly and scurrying on. Her temper was becoming the stuff of evening stories in front of the fireplace, though she tried not to unleash it on servants. On anyone, really, but more so with servants. They lacked the luxury of shouting back. She intended to go straight to her apartments and change, but intentions or no, she turned aside when she saw Rihanna Corley walking in a crossing corridor where the floor tiles were all red. The servants' reactions had nothing to do with it. She was not being stubborn. She was wet, and she wanted dry clothing and a warm towel in the worst way. But seeing the kinswoman was a surprise, and the 2 women with Rihanna also caught her eye. Birgitta muttered a curse before following her, swishing her bowstave sideways through the air as though thinking of striking someone. The bond carried a blend of long suffering and irritability, soon stifled. Avienda never left Elaine's side, though busily trying to wring water out of her shawl. Despite all the rain she had seen, all the rivers since crossing the spine of the world and the great cisterns beneath the city, Avienda winced at the waste, the water splashing uselessly on the floor. The 8 guardswomen, left behind by her sudden swerve, hurried to catch up, stolid and silent except for the stamp of their boots on the floor tiles. Give anyone a sword and boots, and they began stamping. One of the women with Rihanna was Cara Defane, who had been the wise woman or healer of a fishing village on Toman Head before the Shongshan collared her. Plump and merry-eyed in brown wool with embroidered blue and white flowers at her cuffs, Cara appeared little older than Elaine, though she was nearly 50. The other was named Jalari, a former demonic from Shongshan. Despite everything, the sight of her made Elaine's flesh feel cold. Whatever else could be said of her, the woman was Shongshan after all. Not even Jalari herself knew how old she was, though she appeared just into her middle years. Slight of build, with long, fiery red hair and eyes as
I'll be
green
right
as
back.
Avienda's, she and Marilla, the other Shongshan-born Damani who remained in the palace, persisted in maintaining that they still were Damani, that they needed to be colored because of what they could do. Daily walks were one way the kin were trying to accustom them to freedom. Carefully supervised walks, of course. They were always closely watched, day and night. Either might try to free the Sul'dam otherwise. For that matter, Kara herself was not trusted alone with any of the Sul'dam, nor was Lemur, a young Tarabonner noble, collared when Chanchico fell. The notion would not come to them on its own, yet there was no saying what either would do if a Sul'dam ordered her to help the woman escape. The habit of obedience remained strong in Kara and Lemur both. Jalari's eyes widened at the sight of Elaine, and she immediately fell to her knees with a thud. She tried to fold herself into a bundle on the floor, but Kara caught her shoulders and gently urged her back to her feet. Elaine tried not to let her distaste show, and hoped that if it did, everyone would take it for the kneeling and crouching. Some of it was. How could anyone want to be collared? She heard Linny's voice again and shivered. You can't know another woman's reasons until you've worn her dress for a year. Burn her if she had any desire to do that. No need for all that, Kara said. This is what we do. She curtsied, not very gracefully. She had never seen a town larger than a few hundred people before the Shongshan took her. After a moment, the red-haired woman spread her own dark blue skirts more awkwardly still. She almost fell over, in fact, and blushed a bright crimson. Jalari, sorry, she almost whispered, folding her hands at her waist. Her eyes she kept meekly directed at the floor. Jalari will try to remember. I, Kara said, remember what I told you? I call you Jalari, but you call yourself I, or me. Try it, and look at me. You can do it. She sounded as though she were encouraging a child. The Shongshan woman wet her lips, giving Kara a sidelong look. I, she said softly, and promptly began weeping, tears rolling down her cheeks faster than she could wipe them away with her fingers. Kara enveloped her in a hug and made soothing noises. She seemed about to cry too. Avienda shifted uncomfortably. It was not the tears. Men or women, Aiel wept unashamed when they felt the need, but for them touching hands was a great display in public. Why don't you two walk on alone for a while? Rihanna told the pair with a comforting smile that deepened the fine lines at the corners of her blue eyes. Her voice was high and lovely, suitable for singing. I'll catch you up, and we can eat together. They offered her curtsies too, Jalari still weeping, and turned away with Kara's arm around the smaller woman's shoulders. If you care to, my lady, Rihanna said before they had gone 2 steps. We could talk on the way to your apartments. The woman's face was calm, and her tone put no special freight on the words, yet Elaine's jaw tightened. She forced it to relax. There was no point in being stubborn and stupid. She was wet, and beginning to shiver, though the day could hardly be called cold. An excellent suggestion, she said, gathering her sodden gray skirts. Come. We could walk a little faster, Birgitta muttered, not quite far enough under her breath. We could run, Avienda said, without trying to keep her voice low at all. We might get dry from the exertion. Elaine ignored them and glided at a suitable pace. In her mother it would have been called regal. She was not sure she managed that, but she was not about to run through the palace, or even hurry. The sight of her rushing would start a dozen rumors, if not 100, each one of some dire event worse than the one before. Too many rumors floated on every breath of air as it was. The worst was that the city was about to fall, that she planned to flee before it did. No, she would be seen to be utterly unruffled. Everyone had to believe her completely confident, even if that was a false facade. Anything else, and she might as well yield to Aramilla. Fear of defeat had lost as many battles as weakness had, and she could not afford to lose a single one. I thought the Captain General had you out scouting, Rihanna. Birgitta had been using two of the kin for scouts, women who could not make a gateway large enough to admit a horse cart, but with circles of kinswomen available to make gateways for trade as well as moving soldiers, she had co-opted the remaining 6 who could travel on their own. An encircling army was no impediment to them, yet Rihanna's well-cut, fine blue wool, though unadorned save for a red-enameled circle pin on the high neck, was decidedly unsuited for skulking about the countryside. The Captain General believes her scouts need rest, unlike herself, Rihanna added blandly, raising an eyebrow at Birgitta. The Bond carried a brief flash of annoyance. Avienda laughed for some reason. Elaine still did not understand Aiello humor. Tomorrow I go out again. It takes me back to the days long ago when I was a pack peddler with one mule. The kin all followed many crafts during their long lives, always changing location and craft before anyone took note of how slowly they aged. The oldest among them had mastered half a dozen crafts or more, shifting from one to another easily. I decided to use my free day helping Jalari settle on a surname, Rihanna grimaced. It's custom in Shan to strike a girl's name from her family's rolls when she's collared, and the poor woman feels she has no right to the name she was born with. Jalari was given with the collar, but she wants to keep that. There are more reasons to hate the Shan than I can count, Elaine said heatedly. Then, belatedly, she caught up to the import of it all. Learning to curtsy. Choosing a surname. Burn her if pregnancy was making her slow-witted on top of everything else. When did Jalari change her mind about the collar? There was no reason to let everyone know she was being dense today. The other woman's expression did not alter a whit, but she hesitated just long enough to let Elaine know her deception had failed. Just this morning, after you and the Captain General left, or you'd have been informed. Rihanna hurried on, so the point had no time to fester. And there's other news as good, at least it's somewhat good. One of the Sultan, Marley Neutchen, you recall her, has admitted seeing the weeds. Oh, that is good news, Elaine murmured. Very good. 28 more to go, but they might be easier now that one of them is broken. She had watched an attempt to convince Marley that she could learn to channel, that she could already see weaves of the power. The plump Shan woman had been stubbornly defiant even after she began crying. Somewhat good, I said. Rihanna sighed. In Marley's opinion, she might as well have admitted she kills children. Now she insists that she must be collared. She begs for the Idam. It makes my skin creep. I don't know what to do with her. Send her back to the Shan as soon as we can, Elaine replied. Rihanna stopped dead in shock, her eyebrows climbing. Birgitta cleared her throat loudly. Impatience filled the Bond before being stifled, and the kinswoman gave a start, then began walking again at a faster pace than before. But they'll make her a Damani. I can't condemn any woman to that. Elaine gave her warder a look that slid off like a dagger sliding off good armor. Birgitta's expression was bland. To the golden-haired woman, being a warder contained strong elements of older sister, and worse, sometimes mother. I can, she said emphatically, lengthening her own stride. Well, it would not hurt to get dry a little sooner rather than later. She helped hold enough others prisoner that she deserves a taste of it herself, Rihanna. But that's not why I mean to send her back. If any of the others wants to stay and learn and make up for what she's done, I certainly won't hand her to the Shan. But Light's truth, I hope they all feel like Marley. They'll put an Idam on her, Rihanna, but they won't be able to keep secret who she was. Every one-time Suldam I can send the Shanchan to collar will be a mattock digging at their roots. A harsh decision, Rihanna said sadly. She plucked at her skirts in an agitated manner, smoothed them, then plucked at them again. Perhaps you might consider thinking on it for a few days. Surely it isn't anything that has to be done immediately. Elaine gritted her teeth. The woman had as much as implied that she had reached this decision in one of her swinging moods. But had she? It seemed reasonable and logical. They could not keep the Sultan imprisoned forever. Sending those who did not want to be free back to the Shanchan was a way to be rid of them and strike a blow at the Shanchan at the same time. It was more than hatred of any Shanchan. Of course it was. Burn her, but she bloody well hated being unsure whether her own decisions were sound. She could not afford to make unsound decisions. Still, there was no hurry. Better to send back a group, if possible, in any event. There was less chance of someone arranging an accident that way. She did not put that sort of thing past the Shanchan. I will think on it, Rihanna, but I doubt I'll change my mind. Rihanna sighed again, deeply. Eager for her promised return to the White Tower and Novice White, she'd been heard to say she envied Christian and Zarya. She wanted very much to enter the Green Aja, but Elaine had her doubts. Rihanna was kind-hearted, soft-hearted in fact, and Elaine had never met any Green who could be called soft. Even those who seemed frilly or frail on the surface were cold steel inside. Ahead of them, Van Deen glided from a crossing corridor, slender, white-haired, and graceful in dark gray wool with deep brown trim, and turned in the same direction they were going, apparently without noticing them. She was green and as hard as a hammerhead. James, her warder, walked beside her, head bent in close conversation, now and then raking a hand through his thinning gray hair. Gnarled and lean, his dark green coat hanging loose on him, he was old, but every scrap as hard as she, an old root that could dull axes. Kirstian and Zarya, both in plain novice white, followed meekly with their hands folded at their waists, the one pale as a Kyrianan, the other short and slim-hipped. For runaways who had succeeded in what so few did, remaining free of the White Tower for years, over 300 years in Kirstian's case, they had resettled into their places as novices with remarkable ease. But then the kin's rule was a blending of the rules that governed novices and those that accepted lived by. Perhaps, to them, the white woolen dresses and the loss of freedom to come and go as they chose were the only real change, though the kin regulated that last to some extent. I'm very glad she has those two to occupy her, Rihanna murmured in tones of sympathy. Pained caring shone in her eyes. It's good that she mourns her sister, but I fear she'd be obsessed with Adelius's death without Christian and Zarya. She may be anyway. I believe that dress she's wearing belonged to Adelius. I've tried offering solace. I have experience helping people overcome grief. I've been a village wise woman as well as wearing the red belt in Ebudar many years ago, but she won't give me 2 words. In fact, Van Deen wore only her dead sister's clothing now, and Adelius's flowery perfume as well. At times, Elaine thought Van Deen was trying to become Adelius, to offer up herself in order to bring her sister back to life. But could you fault someone for being obsessed with finding who had murdered her sister? Not that more than a handful of people knew that was what she was doing. Everyone else believed, as Rihanna did, that she was absorbed with teaching Christian and Zarya. That and beginning their punishment for running away. Van Deen was doing both, of course, and with a will, yet it was really just a cover for her true purpose. Elaine reached out without looking and found Avienda's hand waiting to take hers, a comforting grip. She squeezed back, unable to imagine the grief of losing Avienda. They shared a quick glance, and Avienda's eyes mirrored her own feelings. Had she really once thought Aiel faces impassive and unreadable? As you say, Rihanna, she has Christian and Zarya to occupy her. Rihanna was not among the handful who knew the truth. We all mourn in our own way. Van Deen will find solace along her own path. When she found Adelius's murderer, it was to be hoped. If that failed to at least begin assuaging the pain, well, that was to be faced when it must be. For now she must allow Vandine her head, especially since she had no doubt the Green would ignore any attempts to rein her in. That was more than irritating, it was infuriating. She had to watch Vandine perhaps destroying herself, and worse, make use of it. Having no alternative made that no less unpalatable. As Vandine and her companions turned aside down another hallway, Rena Harfor appeared out of a side corridor right in front of Elaine, a stout, quiet woman
Hell
with a
yeah.
graying bun atop her head, and an
Let's
air
try to
of
finish
regal
this other
dignity.
one.
Her formal
Been a little
scarlet tabard
distracted.
with the white line of Andors always looking freshly ironed. Elaine had never seen her with the hair out of place, or looking even slightly the worse for a long day spent overseeing the workings of the palace, and more besides. Her round face appeared puzzled for some reason, but it took on a look of concern at the sight of Elaine. "Why, my lady, you're drenched," she said, sounding shocked and familiar curtsy. "You need to get out of those wet things right away." "Thank you, Mistress Harfor," Elaine said through her teeth. "I hadn't noticed." She regretted the outburst instantly. The first maid had been as faithful to her as to her mother. But what made matters worse was that Mistress Harford took her flare-up in stride, never so much as blinking. Elaine Trechan's moods were no longer anything to be surprised at. "I will walk with you if I may, my lady," she said calmly, falling in at Elaine's side. A freckled young serving woman carrying a basket of folded bed linens began to offer her courtesies, only a hair more directed at Elaine than the first maid, but Rena made a quick gesture that sent the girl scurrying before she completed bending her knees. Perhaps it was just to keep her from overhearing. Rena did not stop talking. "3 of the mercenary captains are demanding to meet with you. I put them in the blue reception room and told the servants to keep watch so no small valuables accidentally fall into their pockets. Not that I had to, as it turned out. Kariana Sedai and Saritha Sedai appeared soon after and settled in to keep the captains company. Captain Mellar is with them, too." Elaine frowned. Mellar. She was trying to keep him too busy for mischief, yet he had a way of turning up where and when she least wanted him. For that matter, so did Kariana and Saritha. One of them had to be the Black Aja killer, unless it was Marilola, and she was beyond reach, it seemed. Rena knew about that. Keeping her in the dark would have been criminal. She had eyes everywhere, and they might notice a vital clue. "What do the mercenaries want, Mistress Harfor?" "More money is my guess," Birgitta growled, and swung her unstrung bow like a club. "Most likely," Rena agreed, "but they refused to tell me." Her mouth tightened slightly. No more than that, yet it seemed these mercenaries had managed to offend her. If they were stupid enough not to see that she was more than a superior serving woman, then they were very dense indeed. "Has Dialyn returned?" Elaine asked, and when the first maid said not, added, "Then I will see these mercenaries as soon as I've changed clothes." She might as well get them out of the way. Rounding a corner, she found herself face to face with 2 of the Windfinders and barely suppressed a sigh. The sea folk were the last people on earth she wanted to confront right then. Lean and dark and barefoot in red brocaded silk trousers and a blue brocaded silk blouse with a green sash tied in an elaborate knot. Chanelidin Seren White Shark was aptly named. Elaine had no idea what a white shark looked like. It might well have been a little thing. But Chanella's big eyes were hard enough to belong on a fierce predator, especially when she took in Avienda. There was bad blood there. A tattooed hand raised the gold piercework scent box hanging on a chain about Chanella's neck, and she inhaled the sharp, spicy scent deeply, as though covering some foul odor. Avienda laughed out loud, which made Chanella's full lips grow thin. Thinner, at least. Thin was beyond them. The other was Renila Den Kellen, once windfinder to the mistress of the ships, in blue linen trousers and a red blouse slashed with blue, tied in a much less intricate knot. Both women wore the long white mourning stoles for Nesta Den Rias, yet Renila must have felt Nesta's death most keenly. She was carrying a carved wooden writing box with a capped ink jar set in one corner, and a sheet of paper with a few scrawled lines clipped to its top. Wings of white in her black hair hid the 6 gold earrings in her ears, much thinner rings than the 8 she had worn before learning of Nesta's fate. and the gold honor chain crossing her dark left cheek looked stark, supporting only the medallion that named her clan. After Seafolk custom, Nesta's death had meant starting over for Renila, with no more rank than a woman raised from apprentice on the day she herself had put off her honors. Her face still held dignity, though much subdued, now that she was acting as Shanella's secretary. "I'm on my way," Elaine began, but Shanella cut her off imperiously. "What news do you have of Talan and of Marililla? Are you even trying to find them?" Elaine took a deep breath. Shouting at Shanella never did any good. The woman was more than willing to shout back, and seldom willing to listen to reason. She would not engage in another screaming match. Servants slipping by to either side did not pause to offer bows or curtsies. They could sense the mood here, but they shot grim looks at the Seafolk women. That was pleasing, though it should not have been. However upsetting they were, the Windfinders were guests. In a way, they were. Bargain or no bargain. Shanella had complained more than once of slow-footed servants and tepid bathwater, and that was pleasing, too. Still, she would maintain her dignity and civility. "The news is the same as yesterday," she replied in tones of moderation. Well, she attempted tones of moderation. If traces of sharpness remained, the Windfinder would have to live with them. "The same as last week and the week before that. Inquiries have been made at every inn in Camelin. Your apprentice is not to be found. Marililla is not to be found. It seems they must have managed to leave the city." The gate guards had been warned to watch for a Seafolk woman with tattooed hands, but they would not have tried to stop an Aes Sedai leaving, or taking anyone with her that she wanted. For that matter, the mercenaries would let anyone at all pass who offered a few coins. "And now, if you will excuse me, I am on my way." "That is not good enough!" Shanella's voice was hot enough to singe leather. "You Aes Sedai stick together as tightly as oysters. Marililla kidnapped Talan, and I think you are hiding her. We will search for them, and I assure you when we find them, Marililla will be punished sharply before she is sent to the ships to fulfill her part of the bargain." "You seem to be forgetting yourself," Birgitta said. Her voice was mild, her face calm, but the bond quivered with anger. She held her bowstave propped in front of her with both hands as if to keep them from making fists. "You'll withdraw your accusations, or you'll suffer for it." Perhaps she was not as self-controlled as she seemed. This was no way to go on with Windfinders. They were women of power among their own people and accustomed to wielding it. But Birgitta did not hesitate. "By the bargain Zaida made, you're under the Lady Elaine's authority. You're under my authority. Any searching you do will be when you aren't needed. And unless I misremember badly, you're supposed to be in Tyr right now to bring back wagon loads of grain and salt beef. I strongly suggest you travel there immediately, or you might learn a little about punishment yourself." Oh, that was entirely the wrong way with Windfinders. "No," Elaine said, as hotly as Shanella, surprising herself. "Search, if you wish, Shanella. You and all of the Windfinders. Search Camelin from end to end. And when you can't find Talan or Marililla, you will apologize for calling me a liar." Well, the woman had. As good as, anyway. She felt a strong desire to slap Shanella. She wanted to... Right. Her anger and Birgitta's were feeding one another. Frantically, she tried to soothe her fury before it burst into open rage, but the only result was a sudden longing to weep that she had to fight just as wildly. Shanella drew herself up, scowling. "You would claim we had reneged on the bargain. We have labored like bilge girls this past month, and more. You will not cast us off without meeting your side of the bargain. Renila, the Aes Sedai at the Silver Swan are to be told, mind, that they must produce Marililla and Talan or else pay what the White Tower owes themselves. They cannot pay all, but they can make a start." Renila began unscrewing the silver cap of the ink jar. "Not a note," Shanella snapped. "Go yourself and tell them, now." Tightening the cap, Renila bowed almost parallel to the floor, quickly touching fingertips to her heart. "As you command," she murmured, her face a dark mask. She did not delay in obeying, setting out at a trot the way she had come, with the writing box tucked under her arm. Still fighting the desire to strike Chanella and weep at the same time, Elaine winced. This was not the first time the sea folk had gone to the Silver Swan, nor even the second or third, but always before they had gone asking, not demanding. There were 9 sisters resident at the inn at present. The number kept changing as sisters entered the city or left, and rumor said there were other Aes Sedai in the city too, and it worried her that none had appeared at the palace. She had stayed clear of the Swan. She knew how much Elida wanted to lay hands on her, but not who the sisters at the Swan supported, or whether they supported anyone. They had been close-mouthed as mussels with Sarita and Cariana, yet she had expected some of them to come to the palace, if only to learn what was behind the sea folk's claim. Why were so many Aes Sedai in Caemlyn when Tar Valon itself was under siege? She herself was the first answer that came to mind, and that made her more determined to avoid any sister she did not personally know to be a supporter of Egwene. But that would not stop word of the bargain made for aid in using the Bowl of the Winds from spreading, and of the price the tower had been committed to pay for that help. Burn her, but that news would be a bloody wagon load of fireworks going off at once when it became general knowledge among Aes Sedai. Worse, 10 wagon loads. Watching Renila trot away, she fought to steady her emotions, and tried to bring the tone back to something approaching civilities. She handles her change in circumstances very well, I think. Chanella gave a dismissive puff, and well she should. Every windfinder knows she will rise and fall many times before her body is given back to the salt. She twisted to gaze after the other sea folk woman, and a touch of malice entered her voice. She seemed to be speaking to herself. She fell from a greater height than most, and she should not have been surprised to find her landing hard after so many fingers she trod on while she was... Her mouth snapped shut, and she jerked her head around to glare at Elaine, at Birgitta, at Avienda and Rena, even at the guardswomen, daring them to comment. Elaine prudently kept her mouth closed, and the light be thanked, so did everyone else. For her part, she thought she almost had her temper smoothed, the desire to cry suppressed, and she did not want to say anything that might start Chanella shouting and undo all her work. For that matter, she could not think of anything to say after hearing that. She doubted it was part of Asa Amir custom to take revenge on someone you believed had misused their position above you. It was very human, though. The windfinder stared her up and down, frowning. "You're wet," she said, as though just noticing. "It is very bad to be wet for long in your condition. You should change your clothes right away." Elaine threw back her head and screamed as loudly as she could, a howl of pure outrage and fury. She screamed until her lungs were empty, leaving her panting. In the silence that followed, everyone stared at her in amazement. Almost everyone. Avienda began laughing so hard she had to lean against a tapestry of mounted hunters confronting a leopard that had turned. She had one arm pressed across the middle as if her ribs hurt. The bond carried amusement, too. Amusement! Though Birgitta's face remained as smooth as his sister's. "I must travel to Tyr," Chanella said breathily after a moment, and as she turned away, without another word or any gesture toward a courtesy. Rena and Rihanna offered curtsies, neither quite meeting Elaine's eye, and pled duties before hurrying off. Elaine stared at Birgitta and Avienda in turn. "If one of you says a single word," she said warningly. Birgitta put on such an expression of innocence that it was palpably false, and the bond carried such mirth that Elaine found herself fighting the urge to laugh. Avienda only laughed the harder. Gathering her skirts and such dignity as she could summon, Elaine set out for her apartments. If she walked faster than before, well, she did want to get out of these damp clothes. That was the only reason. The only reason. Chapter 15. A different skill. To Elaine's fury, a quiet, simmering fury that clenched her jaw, she got lost on the way to the apartments. Those rooms had been hers since she left the nursery, yet twice she took a turn only to find that it did not lead where she expected. and a sweeping flight of marble-railed stairs took her in entirely the wrong direction. Burn her. Now being with child was fuzzing her wits completely. She could feel puzzlement and increasing concern through the bond as she retraced her way, climbed a different set of stairs. Some of the guardswomen murmured uneasily, not quite loudly enough for her to make out the words, until the banner woman in charge, a slim, cool-eyed Saldaean named Devora Zarbaean, silenced them with a sharp word. Even Avienda began looking at her doubtfully. Well, she was not about to have getting lost in the palace flung in her face. Not a word from anybody, she said grimly. Not one, she added when Birgitta opened her mouth anyway. The golden-haired woman snapped her jaws shut and gave a tug at her thick braid, almost the way Nynaeve did. She did not bother to keep disapproval from her face, and the bond still carried puzzlement and worry. Enough that Elaine began to feel worried herself. She struggled to fight that off before she found herself wringing her hands and apologizing. It was that strong. I think I'll try to find my rooms, if I can have just a few words, Birgitta said in a tight voice. I want to get dry before I wear out my boots. We need to talk of this later. I fear there's nothing to be done, but with a stiff nod, barely bending her neck, she stalked off, slashing her unstrung bow from side to side. Elaine almost called her back. She wanted to, but Birgitta had as much need of dry clothing as she. Besides, her mood had swung to grumpy and stubborn. She was not going to talk about losing her way in the very halls where she had grown up, not now or later. Nothing to be done? What did that mean? If Birgitta was suggesting that her wits were too befuddled to be set straight, her jaw tightened all over again. At last, after yet another unexpected turn, she found the tall, lion-carved doors of her apartments and heaved a small sigh of relief. She had begun to think her memories of the palace really were completely jumbled. A pair of guardswomen, resplendent in broad-brimmed hats with white plumes and lace-edged sashes embroidered with the white lion slanting across their burnished breastplates, and more pale lace at their cuffs and necks, stiffened on either side of the doors at her approach. She intended them to have red-lacquered breastplates to match their silk coats and breeches when she had time to spend on that sort of thing. If they were to be so pretty that any assailant would discount them until it was too late, she would make them positively gaudy. None of the guardswomen seemed to mind. In fact, they were eagerly looking forward to the lacquered breastplates. She had overheard some who were unaware she was near disparage the guardswomen, mostly women, but including Doylin Mellar, their own commander. Yet she had full confidence in their ability to protect her. They were brave and determined, or they would not have been there. Urith Azeri and others who had been merchants' guards, a rare trade for women, gave daily lessons in the sword, and one or another of the warders gave a second lesson every day, too. Saritha's Ned Yarman and Van Dien's Jane were quite laudatory about how quickly they learned. James said it was because they did not think they already knew something of how to use a blade, which seemed silly. How could you believe you already knew something if you needed lessons in it? Despite the guards already there, Devora told off two of those who accompanied her, and they drew their swords and went inside, while Elaine waited in the corridor with Avienda and the rest, tapping her foot impatiently. Everyone avoided looking at her. The search was not a slur on the women guarding the doors. She supposed it was possible for someone to scale the side of the palace. There certainly was carving enough to provide handholds, yet she felt irritation at being made to wait on it. Only when they came out and reported to Devora that there were no assassins waiting within, no Aes Sedai waiting to whisk Elaine back to Elida and the tower, were she and Avienda allowed to enter, with the guardswomen forming up on either side of the doors with the others. She was not sure they would have physically prevented her from entering sooner, but so far she'd been unwilling to put it to the test. Being restrained by her own bodyguards would have been beyond insufferable, no matter that they were just doing their jobs. Better to avoid the possibility altogether. A small fire burned on the white marble hearth of the anteroom, but it seemed to give little warmth. The carpets had been taken up for spring, and the floor tiles felt cold beneath the soles of her shoes, stout as they were. Asanda, her maid, spread red-trimmed gray skirts with still surprising grace, though the slim, white-haired woman suffered from painful joints, which she denied and refused healing for. She would have refused any suggestion that she return to her retirement as vehemently. Elaine's golden lily was embroidered large on her breast and proudly worn. Two younger women flanked her a pace back in similar livery, but with smaller lilies, stocky, square-faced sisters named Sephany and Neris. Shy-eyed, yet quite well-trained by Asanda, they made deep curtsies, settling nearly to the floor. Slow-moving and frail Asanda might be, but she never wasted time in idle chit-chat or stating the obvious. There were no exclamations over how wet Elaine and Avienda were, though doubtless the guardswomen had alerted her. "We'll get you both warm and dry, my lady, and right into something suitable for meeting mercenaries. The red silk with fire drops on the neck should impress them suitably. It's past time you ate, too. Don't bother telling me you have, my lady. Neris, go fetch meals from the kitchens for the Lady Elaine and the Lady Avienda." Avienda gave a snort of laughter, yet she had long since ceased objecting to being called lady. And a good thing, since she would never stop Asanda. With servants, there were things you commanded and things you simply had to tolerate. Neris grimaced and took a deep breath for some reason, but dropped another deep curtsy, this to Asanda, and one only slightly deeper to Elaine. She and her sister were every bit as much in awe of the elderly woman as they were of the daughter heir of Andor, before gathering her skirts and darting into the corridor. Elaine grimaced too. The guardswomen had also told Asanda about the mercenaries, apparently, and that she had not eaten. She hated people talking about her behind her back, but how much of that was her shifting moods? She could not recall being upset before because a maid knew what dress to lay out in advance, or because someone knew she was hungry and sent for a meal without being asked. Servants talked among themselves, gossiped constantly in truth, that was a given, and passed along anything that might help their mistress be served better if they were good at their jobs. Asanda was very good at hers. Still, it rankled, and it rankled the worse for her knowing that it was irrational. She let Asanda lead her and Avienda into the dressing room, with Sephany bringing up the rear. She was feeling very miserable by this time, damp and shivering, not to mention angry with Birgitta for stalking off, frightened by losing her way in the place she had grown up, and sullen over her bodyguards gossiping about her. In truth, she felt absolutely wretched. Soon enough, though, Asanda had her out of her wet things and wrapped in a large white towel that had been hanging on a warming rack in front of the wide marble fireplace at the end of the room. That had a soothing effect. This fire was not at all small, and the room seemed not far short of hot, a welcome heat that soaked into the flesh and banished shivers. Asanda toweled Elaine's hair dry while Sephany performed the same office for Avienda, which chagrined Avienda still, though this was hardly the first time. She and Elaine frequently brushed one another's hair at night, yet accepting this simple service from a lady's maid put spots of color in Avienda's sun-dark cheeks. When Sephany opened one of the wardrobes lining one wall, Avienda sighed deeply. She held one towel loosely draped around her. Another woman drying her hair might be embarrassing, but near nudity presented no difficulties, and a second, smaller, was wrapped around her hair. "Do you think I should wear wetlander clothes, Elaine, since we are going to meet these mercenaries?" she asked in tones of great reluctance. Asanda smiled. She enjoyed dressing Avienda in silks. Elaine hid a smile of her own, no easy task, since she wanted to laugh. Her sister pretended to disdain silks, but she seldom missed an opportunity to wear them. "If you can bear it, Avienda," she said gravely, adjusting her own robing towel carefully. Asanda saw her in her skin every day, and Sephany too, but it was nothing to let happen without reason. "For best effect, we should both overawe them. You won't mind too much, will you?" But Avienda was already at the wardrobe, her towel gaping carelessly as she fingered dresses. Several sets of Aiel garb hung in another of the wardrobes, but Tylan had given her chests of finely cut silks and woolens before they left Abu Dar, enough to fill nearly a quarter of the carved cabinets. That brief burst of amusement left Elaine no longer feeling as if she had to argue over everything. So without demurral, she let Asanda get her into the red silk, with fire drops the size of a finger joint sewn in a band around the high neck. The garment would impress, for sure, with no need for other jewels, though in truth the great serpent ring on her right hand was jewel enough for anyone. The white-haired woman had a delicate touch, but Elaine still winced as she began doing up the rows of tiny buttons down her back, tightening the bodice across her tender bosom. Opinions varied on how long that would last, yet all agreed that she could expect more swelling. Oh, how she wished Rand were near enough to share the full effect of her bond with him. That would teach him to get her with child so carelessly. Of course, she could have drunk the heart-leaf tea before lying with him. She pushed that thought away firmly. This was all Rand's fault, and that was that. Avienda chose blue, which she often did, with rows of tiny pearls edging the bodice. The silk was not so deeply cut as Ebudari fashions, yet still would display a little cleavage. Few dresses sewn in Ebudar failed to do that. As Stephanie began fastening her buttons, Avienda fondled something she had retrieved from her belt pouch, a small dagger with a rough hilt of deer horn wrapped in gold wire. It was also a Turangrial, though Elaine had not been able to puzzle out what it did before pregnancy forced a halt to such studies. She had not known her sister was carrying the thing. Avienda's eyes were almost dreamy as she stared at it. "Why does that fascinate you so?" Elaine asked. This was not the first time she had seen the other woman absorbed in that knife. Avienda gave a start and blinked at the dagger in her hands. The iron blade, it looked like iron at least, and felt almost like iron, had never been sharpened so far as Elaine could tell, and was little longer than her palm, though wide in proportion. Even the point was too blunt for stabbing. "I thought to give it to you, but you never said anything about it, so I thought I might be wrong, and then we would believe you were safe, from some dangers at least, when you were not. So I decided to keep it. That way, if I am right, at least I could protect you, and if I am wrong, it does no harm." Elaine shook her towel-wrapped head in confusion. "Right about what? What are you talking about?" "This," Avienda said, holding up the dagger. "I think that if you have this in your possession, the shadow cannot see you. Not the eyeless or the shadow-twisted, maybe not even leaf-blighter. Except that I must be wrong if you did not see it." Stephanie gasped, her hands going still until Asanda murmured a soft admonition. Asanda had lived too long to be shaken by mere mention of the shadow, or much else for that matter. Elaine stared. She had tried teaching Avienda to make Turangrial, but her sister possessed not a scrap of facility there. Yet perhaps she had a different skill, maybe even one that could be called a talent. "Come with me," she said, and taking Avienda's arm, she almost pulled her out of the dressing room. Asanda followed with a torrent of protest, and Stephanie attempting to continue buttoning up Avienda's dress on the fly. In the larger of the apartment's two sitting rooms, goodly fires blazed in both of the fireplaces, and if the air was not so warm as in the dressing room, it was still comfortable. The scroll-edged table bordered with low-backed chairs in the middle of the white-tiled floor was where she and Avienda took most of their meals. Several leather-bound books from the palace library sat in a stack on one end of the table, histories of Andor and books of tales. The mirrored stand lamps gave a good light, and they often read here of an evening. More importantly, a long side table against one dark-paneled wall was covered with Turangrial from the cache the kin had kept hidden in Ebudar. Cups and bowls, statuettes and figurines, jewelry, all manner of things. Most looked commonplace, aside from perhaps the strangeness of design, yet even the most fragile seeming could not be broken, and some were much lighter or heavier than they appeared. She could no longer safely study them in any meaningful way. She had Min's assurance her babes could not be harmed, but with her control of the power so slippery, damaging herself was more a possibility than ever. Yet she changed what was on the table every day, picking out pieces at random from the panniers kept in the apartment's box room, just so she could look at them and speculate on what she had learned before getting with child. Not that she had learned very much, well, nothing really, but she could think on them. There was no worry of anything being stolen. Rena had rooted out most, if not all, of the dishonest among the servants, and the constant guard at the entrance saw to the rest. Mouth tight with disapproval, dressing was done in the dressing room, decently, not out where anyone at all might walk in. Asanda resumed her task with Elaine's buttons. Stephanie, likely as agitated by the older woman's displeasure as anything else, breathed hard as she worked on Avienda's. "Pick out something and tell me what you think it does," Elaine said. Looking and speculating had done no good, as she had not expected it to. Yet if Avienda could somehow tell what a Terangrial did just by holding it. Jealousy surged up in her, hot and bitter, but she knocked it down, then for good measure jumped up and down on it until it vanished. She would not be jealous of Avienda. "I'm not sure that I can, Elaine. I only think this knife makes a kind of warding, and I must be wrong or you would know it. You know more of these things than anyone." Elaine's cheeks heated with embarrassment. "I don't know nearly as much as you seem to think. Try, Avienda. I've never heard of anyone being able to read Terangrial, but if you can, even a little, don't you see how wonderful that would be?" Avienda nodded, but her face held doubt. Hesitantly, she touched a slim black rod, a pace long, and so flexible it could be bent into a circle and spring back, lying in the middle of the table. Touched it and jerked her hand back swiftly, wiping her fingers unconsciously on her skirt. "This causes pain." "Nynaeve told us that," Elaine said impatiently, and Avienda gave her a level look. "Nynaeve Almira did not say you can change how much pain each blow gives." Uncertainty overcame her again at once, though, and her voice became tentative. "At least I think that can be done. I think one blow can feel like 1 or 100, but I'm only guessing, Elaine. It is only what I think." "Keep going," Elaine told her encouragingly. "Maybe we'll find something that makes it certain. What about this?" She picked up an oddly shaped metal cap, covered with strange angular patterns of what seemed to be the most minute engraving. It was much too thin to be of use as a helmet, though it was twice as heavy as it appeared. The metal felt slick, too, not simply smooth, as if it were oiled. Avienda put down the dagger reluctantly and turned the cap over once in her hands before setting it back on the table and taking up the dagger again. "I think that allows you to direct a device of some sort, a machine." She shook her towel-wrapped head. "But I do not know how or what kind of machine. You see, I'm only guessing again." Elaine would not let her stop, though. Terangrial after Terangrial Avienda touched or sometimes held for a moment, and every time she had an answer, delivered hesitantly and with cautions that it was only a surmise, but always an answer. She thought a small hinged box, apparently ivory and covered with rippling red and green stripes, held music, hundreds of tunes, perhaps thousands. With a Terangrial, that might be possible. After all, a fine music box might have cylinders for as many as 100 tunes, and some could play quite long pieces on one cylinder after another without changing them. A flattish white bowl almost a pace across was for looking at things that were far away, she thought, and a tall vase worked with vines in green and blue vines, would gather water out of the air. That sounded useless, but Avienda almost caressed it, and after consideration Elaine realized it would be very useful indeed in the waste, if it worked as Avienda believed, and someone figured out how to make it work. A black and white figurine of a bird with long wings spread in flight was for talking to people a long way off, she said. So was a blue figure of a woman, small enough to fit the palm of her hand, in an oddly cut skirt and coat. And 5 earrings, 6 finger rings, and 3 bracelets. Elaine began to think that Avienda was giving up, offering the same answer every time in hopes that she would stop asking. But then she realized that her sister's voice was becoming more confident rather than less, that the protests that she was only guessing had dwindled, and her guesses were growing in detail. A bent, featureless rod of dull black, as wide as her wrist. It seemed metal, yet one end accommodated itself to any hand that gripped it, made her think of cutting, either metal or stone if they were not too thick. Nothing that could catch fire, though. The apparently glass figure of a man, a foot tall, with his hand raised as if to signal stop, would chase away vermin, which would certainly have been useful, given Cayman's plague of rats and flies. A stone carving the size of her hand, all deep blue curves, it felt like stone at least, though somehow it did not really look carved, was for growing something, not plants. It made her think of holes, only they were not exactly holes, and she did not believe anyone had the channel to make it work. Only sing the right song. Some Terangrial did not require channeling, but really, singing? Done with Avienda's dress, Stephanie had grown enthralled with the recitation, her eyes getting wider and wider. Asanda listened with interest too, her head tilted to one side, murmuring
Hey,
small
Zoe, how you
exclamations
doing?
at each new revelation, but she was not bouncing on her toes the way Stephanie was. "What about that one, my lady?" the younger woman blurted when Avienda paused. She pointed to the statuette of a stout, bearded man with a merry smile, holding a book. 2 feet tall, it appeared to be age-darkened bronze, and was certainly heavy enough to be. "Looking at him always makes me want to smile too, my lady." "Me as well, Stephanie Peldon," Avienda said, stroking the bronze man's head. "He holds more than the book, you see. He holds thousands and thousands of books." Abruptly the light of Sidar enveloped her, and she touched 2 thin flows of fire and earth to the bronze figure. Stephanie squeaked as 2 words in the old tongue appeared in the air above the statuette, as black as if printed with good ink. Some of the letters were shaped a little oddly, but the words were quite clear. Ansoan and Insoan, floating on nothing. Avienda looked nearly as startled as the maid. "I think we have proof at last," Elaine said more calmly than she felt. Her heart was in her throat and pounding. Lies and truth, the 2 words might be translated. Or in context, perhaps fiction and not fiction would be better. It was proof enough for her. She marked where the flows touched the figure for when she could return to her study. "But you shouldn't return it. It isn't safe." The glare around Avienda vanished. "Oh, light!" she exclaimed, flinging her arms around Elaine. "I never thought. I have great toll to you. I never meant to endanger you or your babes. Never." "My babes and I are safe," Elaine laughed. Min's viewing? Her babes were safe, at least, until they were born. So many babes died in their first year. Min had said nothing beyond them being born healthy. Min had said nothing about her not being burned out either, but she had no intention of bringing that up with her sister already feeling guilty. "You have no toe to me. It was you I was thinking of. You could have died or burned yourself out." Avienda pulled back enough to look into Elaine's eyes. What she saw there reassured her, for a small smile curved her lips. "I did make it work, though. Perhaps I can take over the study of them. With you to guide me, it should be perfectly safe. We have months before you can do it yourself." "You have no time at all, Avienda," a woman's voice said from the doorway. "We are leaving. I hope you have not grown too used to wearing silk. I see you, Elaine." Avienda leaped away from the embrace, flushing furiously, as 2 Aiel women entered the room, and not just any 2 Aiel. Pale-haired Nadir, as tall as most men and wide with it, was a wise one of considerable authority among the Goshin. And Dorinda, her long red hair touched with white, was the wife of Baal, clan chief of the Goshin, though her true prominence came from being roof mistress of Smoke Springs Hold, the clan's largest hold. It was she who had spoken. "I see you, Dorinda," Elaine said. "I see you, Nadir. Why are you taking Avienda away?" "You said I could stay with Elaine to help guard her back," Avienda protested. "You did, Dorinda." Elaine took her sister's hand in a firm grip, and Avienda squeezed back. "You and the wise ones, too." Gold and ivory bracelets clattered as Dorinda shifted her dark shawl. "How many do you need to guard your back, Elaine?" she asked dryly. "You have perhaps 100 or more dedicated to nothing else, and as hard as Fardar Ismai." A smile deepened the creases at the corners of her eyes. "I think those women outside wanted us to give up our belt knives before letting us in." Nadir touched the horn hilt of her knife, her green eyes holding a fierce light, though it was unlikely the guards had shown any such desire. Even Birgitta, suspicious of everyone when it came to Elaine's safety, could see no danger from the Aiel, and Elaine had accepted certain obligations when she and Avienda adopted one another. Wise ones who had taken part in that ceremony, as Nadir had, could go wherever they wished in the house, whenever they wished. That was one of the obligations. As for Dorinda, her presence was so commanding, if in a quiet way, that it seemed inconceivable anyone would attempt to bar her way. Your training has been in abeyance too long, Avienda, Nadir said firmly. Go and change into proper clothing. But I am learning so much from Elaine, Nadir. Weaves even you do not know. I think I can make it rain in the threefold land. And just now we learned that I can... Whatever you may have learned, Nadir cut in sharply, it seems you have forgotten as much, such as the fact that you are an apprentice still. The power is the least of what a wise one must know, else only those can channel would be wise ones. Now go and change and count your luck that I do not make you return in your skin to face a strapping. The tents are being struck as we speak, and if the clan's departure is delayed, you will face the strap. Without another word, Avienda dropped Elaine's hand and ran from the room, bumping into Neris, who staggered and almost dropped the large cloth-covered tray she was carrying. At a quick gesture from Isanda, Stephanie hurried after Avienda. Neris's eyes went wide at the sight of the Aiel women, but Isanda admonished her for taking so long, and directed her to lay out the meal on the table, setting the young maid into hurried motion while muttering apologies under her breath. Elaine wanted to run after Avienda too, to grasp every moment with her, but Nadir's words held her. You're leaving Caneland, Dorinda? Where are you going? As much as Elaine liked Aiel, she did not want them wandering about the countryside. With the situation as unstable as it was, they were problem enough simply venturing out of their camp to hunt or trade. We are leaving Andor, Elaine. In a few hours we will be far beyond your borders. As to where, you must ask the Karakarn. Nadir had walked over to study what Neris was laying out, and Neris began to tremble so that she nearly dropped more than one dish. This looks good, but I do not recognize some of these herbs, the wise one said. Your midwife has approved all of this, Elaine? I'll summon a midwife when my time is near, Nadir. Dorinda, you can't think Rand would want your destination kept from me. What did he say? Dorinda gave a small shrug. He sent a messenger, one of the black coats, with a letter for Bale. Bale let me read it, of course. Her tone said there had never been any question of her not reading it. But the Karakarn asked Bale not to tell anyone, so I cannot tell you. No midwife? Nadir said incredulously. Who tells you what to eat and drink? Who gives you the proper herbs? Stop looking daggers at me, woman. Melane's temper is worse than yours could ever be, but she has sense enough to let Monaella govern her in these things. Every woman in the palace governs what I eat, Elaine replied bitterly. Sometimes I think every woman in Caneland does. Dorinda, can't you at least... My lady, your food is getting cold, Isanda said mildly, but with just the touch of firmness that an elderly retainer was allowed. Gritting her teeth, Elaine glided to the chair Isanda stood behind. She did not flounce, much as she wanted to. She glided. Isanda produced an ivory-backed hairbrush, and removing the towel from Elaine's head, began brushing her hair while she ate. She ate largely because not eating only meant someone would be told to fetch more hot food, because Isanda and her own bodyguards between them might well keep her there until she did. But except for some dried apple that had not gone bad, the meal was decidedly unappetizing. The bread was crusty but flecked with weevils, and the soaked dried beans, since all of the preserved beans had spoiled, were tough and tasteless. The apple was mixed in a bowl of herbs, sliced burdock root, black haw, cramp bark, dandelion, nettle leaf, with a touch of oil, and for meat she had a piece of kid simmered in bland broth, with next to no salt, as far as she could tell. She would have killed for salty beef dripping with fat. Avienda's plate had sliced beef, though it looked tough. She could as well ask for wine. To drink, she had her choice of water or goat's milk. She wanted tea almost as much as she did fatty meat, but even the weakest tea sent her running to make water, and she had quite enough difficulties with that as it was. So she ate methodically, mechanically, trying to think of anything but the tastes in her mouth. except for the apple at least. She tried to pry some news of Rand out of the two Aiel women, but it seemed they knew less than she, as far as they would admit, anyway. They could be close-mouthed when they wanted to be. She at least knew that he was somewhere far to the southeast. Somewhere in Tyr, she suspected, though he could as easily have been on the plains of Merida or in the spine of the world. Beyond that, she knew he was alive, and not a whit more. She tried keeping the conversation on Rand in the hope they might let something slip, yet she might as well have tried dressing bricks with her fingers. Dorinda and Nadir had their own goal, convincing her to acquire a midwife right away. They went on and on about how she might be endangering herself and her babes, and not even Min's viewing would dissuade them. Very well, she said at last, slapping down her knife and fork. I will start looking for one today. And if she failed to find one, well, they would never know. I have a niece who's a midwife, my lady, Asanda said. Malphane dispenses herbs and ointments from a shop on Candle Street in the New City, and I believe she is quite knowledgeable. She patted a few last curls into place and stepped back with a pleased smile. You do so remind me of your mother, my lady. Elaine sighed. It seemed she was to have a midwife whether she wanted one or not. Someone else to see that her meals were wretched. Well, perhaps the midwife could suggest a remedy for those backaches at night, and the tender bosom. Thank the light she had been spared the desire to sick up. Women who could channel never suffered that part of pregnancy. When Avienda returned, she was in Aiel garb again, a still damp shawl draped over her arms, a dark scarf tied around her temples to hold back her hair, and a bundle on her back. Unlike the multitudes of bracelets and necklaces Dorinda and Nadir wore, she had a single silver necklace, intricately worked discs in a complex pattern, and one ivory bracelet densely carved with roses and thorns. She handed Elaine the blunt dagger. You must keep this so you will be safe. I will try to visit you as often as I can. There may be time for an occasional visit, Nadir said severely. But you have fallen behind and must work hard to catch up. Strange, she mused, shaking her head. To speak casually of visiting from so far. To cover leagues, hundreds of leagues in a step. Strange things we have learned in the wetlands. Come, Avienda, we must go, Dorinda said. Wait, Elaine told them. Please wait just a moment. Clutching the dagger, she raced to her dressing room. Stephanie paused in hanging up Avienda's blue dress to curtsy, but Elaine ignored her and opened the carved lid of her ivory jewelry chest. Sitting atop the necklaces and bracelets and pins in their compartments were a brooch in the shape of a turtle that appeared to be amber, and a seated woman, wrapped in her own hair, apparently carved from age-darkened ivory. Both were Angreon. Placing the antler-hilted dagger in the chest, she picked up the turtle and then impulsively snatched up the twisted stone dream ring, all red and blue and brown. It seemed to be useless to her since she became pregnant, and if she could manage to weave spirit, she still had the silver ring worked in braided spirals that had been recovered from Ispan. Hurrying back to the sitting room, she found Dorinda and Nadir arguing, or at least having an animated discussion, while Asanda pretended to be checking for dust, running her fingers under the edge of the table. From the angle of her head, she was listening avidly, though. Neris, putting Elaine's dishes back on the tray, was gaping at the Aiel women openly. I told her she would feel the strap if we delayed the departure, Nadir was saying with some heat as Elaine entered the room. It is hardly fair if she is not the cause, but I said what I said. You will do as you must, Dorinda replied calmly, but with a tightness to her eyes that suggested these were not the first words they had exchanged. Perhaps we will not delay anything, and perhaps Avienda will pay the price gladly to say farewell to her sister. Elaine did not bother with trying to argue for Avienda. It would have done no good. Avienda herself displayed an equanimity that would have credited an Aes Sedai, as if whether she was to be beaten for another's fault were of no matter at all. These are for you, Elaine said, pressing the ring and the brooch into her sister's hand. Not as gifts, I'm afraid. The White Tower will want them back, but to use as you need. Avienda looked at the things and gasped. Even the loan of these is a great gift. You shame me, sister. I have no farewell gift to give in return. You give me your friendship. You gave me a sister. Elaine felt a tear slide down her cheek. She essayed a laugh, but it was a weak, tremulous thing. How can you say you have nothing to give? You've given me everything. Tears glistened in Avienda's eyes, too. Despite the others watching, she put her arms around Elaine and hugged her hard. I will miss you, sister, she whispered. My heart is as cold as night. And mine, sister, Elaine whispered, hugging back equally hard. I will miss you, too, but you will be allowed to visit me sometimes. This isn't forever. No, not forever. But I will still miss you. They might have begun weeping next, only Dorinda laid her hands on their shoulders. It is time, Avienda. We must go if you are to have any hope of avoiding the strap. Avienda straightened with a sigh, scrubbing at her eyes. May you always find water and shade, sister. May you always find water and shade, sister, Elaine replied. The Aiel way had a finality about it, so she added, until I see your face again. And as quickly as that, they were gone. As quickly as that, she felt very alone. Avienda's presence had become a certainty, a sister to talk to, laugh with, share her hopes and fears with. That comfort was gone. Sanda had slipped from the room while she and Avienda were hugging, and now she returned to set the coronet of the daughter heir on Elaine's head, a simple circlet of gold supporting a single golden rose on her forehead. So these mercenaries won't forget who they're talking to, my lady. Elaine did not realize her shoulders had slumped until she straightened them. Her sister was gone, yet she had a city to defend and a throne to gain. Duty would have to sustain her now. Chapter 16. The New Follower. The blue reception room, named for its arched ceiling, painted to display the sky and white clouds, and its blue floor tiles, was the smallest reception room in the palace, less than 10 paces square. The arched windows that made up the far wall, overlooking a courtyard, and still filled with glassed casements against the spring weather, gave a fair light, even with the rain falling outside. But despite two large fireplaces with carved marble mantels, a cornice of plaster lions, and a pair of tapestries bearing the white lion that flanked the doors, a delegation of Camelon's merchants would have been insulted to be received in the blue room, a delegation of bankers livid. Likely that was why Mistress Farfor had put the mercenaries there, although they would not know they were being insulted. She herself was present, overseeing the pair of liveried young maids who were keeping the wine cups full from tall silver pitchers standing on a tray atop a plainly carved sideboard. But she had the embossed leather folder used to carry her reports pressed to her bosom, as if in anticipation of the mercenaries being dealt with quickly. Halwyn Nori, the wisps of white hair behind his ears as always looking like feathers, was standing in a corner, also with his leather folder clutched to his narrow chest. Their reports were a daily fixture, and seldom much in them to cheer the heart of late. Quite the opposite. Warned by the pair of guardswomen who had checked the room ahead of her, everyone was on their feet when Elaine entered, with another pair at her back. Denny Colford, in charge of the guardswomen who had replaced Devora and the others, had simply ignored her order for them all to remain outside. Ignored her! She supposed they made a good show, swaggering proudly as they did, yet she could not stop grinding her teeth. Tariana and Saritha, formal in their fringed shawls, bowed their heads slightly in respect, but Mellar swept off his plumed hat in a flourishing bow, one hand laid over the lace-edged sash slanting across his burnished breastplate. The 6 golden knots brazed to that breastplate, 3 on each shoulder, rankled her, yet she had let them pass so far. His hatchet face offered her a smile that was much too warm, too. But then, however cold she was to him, he thought he had some chance with her because she had not denied the rumor her babes were his. Her reasons for not countering that filthy tale had changed. She no longer had need to protect her babes, Rand's babes, yet she let it stand. Give the man time and he would braid a rope for his own neck. And if he failed to, she would braid one for him. The mercenaries, all well into their middle years, were only a heartbeat behind Mellor, though not so elaborate in their courtesies. Evard Fordwin, a tall, square-jawed Andorran, wore a large ruby in his left ear, and Aldred Gomyson, short and slender, the front of his head shaved, had horizontal stripes of red and green and blue covering half his chest, far more than it seemed at all likely he was entitled to in his native Cairn. Hafin Bakavan, graying, was ornamented with a thick gold hoop in his left ear and a jeweled ring on every finger. The Damani was very stout, but the way he moved spoke of solid muscle beneath the fat. "Don't you have duties, Captain Mellor?" Elaine said coolly, taking one of the room's few chairs. There were only 5, arms and high backs, simply carved with vines and leaves, and lacking even a hint of gilt. Standing in a widely spaced row in front of the windows, the chairs put the light behind whoever sat in them. On a bright day, those given audience here squinted in the glare. Unfortunately, that advantage was lost today. The 2 guardswomen took up positions behind her and to either side, each with a hand resting on her sword hilt, watching the mercenaries with fierce expressions that made Bakavan smile and Gomyson rub his chin to half hide a sly grin. The women gave no sign of being offended. They knew the point of their uniforms. Elaine knew they would wipe away any smiles very quickly if they needed to draw their blades. "My first duty above all is to protect you, my lady." Easing his sword, Mellor eyed the mercenaries as though he expected them to attack her, or perhaps him. Gomyson looked bitterly amused, and Bakavan laughed aloud. All 3 men had empty scabbards, Fordwin a pair on his back. No mercenary was allowed to enter the palace carrying so much as a dagger. "I know you have other duties," she said levelly, "because I assigned them to you, Captain. Training the men I brought in from the countryside. You're not spending as much time with them as I expect. You have a company of men to train, Captain. A company of old men and boys, and surely enough to occupy his hours. He spent few enough with her bodyguards in spite of commanding them. That was just as well, really. He liked to pinch bottoms. I suggest you see to them. Now." Rage flashed across Mellor's narrow face. He actually quivered, but he mastered himself instantly. It was all gone so fast that she might have imagined it, but she knew she had not. "As you command, my lady," he said smoothly. His smile had an oily smoothness, too. "My honor is to serve you well." With another flamboyant bow, he started for the door, as near to strutting as made no difference. Little could dent Doyling Mellor's demeanor for long. Bakavan laughed again, throwing his head back. "Man wears so much lace now, I vow. I keep expecting him to offer to teach us to dance, and now he does dance." The Cairn laughed, too, a nasty, guttural sound. Mellor's back stiffened and his step hesitated, then quickened, so much so that he bumped into Brigitta at the doorway. He hurried on without stopping to ask pardon, and she frowned after him. The bond carried anger, quickly suppressed, and impatience, which was not, before shutting the door behind her and moving to stand beside Elaine's chair with one hand resting on the chair back. Her thick braid was not so neatly done as usual after having been undone for drying, but the uniform of the Captain General suited her. Taller than Gomyson in her heeled boots, Birgitta had a commanding presence when she wanted to. The mercenaries offered her small bows, respectful, though not deferential. Whatever misgivings of her they might have entertained in the beginning, few who had seen her use her bow or expose herself to the enemy had any remaining. "You speak as if you know, Captain Mellor, Captain Bakavan?" Elaine put just a hint of question in that, but kept her tone casual. Birgitta was attempting to project confidence along the bond to equal her expression, yet wariness and worry kept intruding, and the ever-present weariness. Elaine tightened her jaw to fight a yawn. Birgitta had to get some rest. "I've seen him once or twice before, my lady," the Damani replied cautiously. "Not above thrice at most, I'd say. Yes, no more than that." He tilted his head, eyeing her almost sideways. "You know he's followed my trade in the past." "He did not try to hide the fact, Captain," she said, as if tired of the subject. Had he let anything interesting slip, she might have arranged to question him alone, but pressing was not worth the risk of Mellar discovering that questions were being asked. He might run, then, before she could learn what she wanted to know. "Do we really have need of the Aes Sedai, my lady?" Bakovan asked. "The other Aes Sedai," he added, glancing at her great serpent ring. He held out his silver cup, and one of the maids darted to fill it. They were both pretty women, perhaps not the best choices, but Rena had not much to choose from. Most of the maids were either young or else aged and not so spry as they once had been. "All they've done the whole time we've been here is try to put us in awe of the White Tower's might and reach. I respect Aes Sedai as much as any man. Yes, do indeed. But if you'll forgive me, it gets tiresome when they turn to trying to browbeat a man. I vow it does, my lady." "A wise man always stands in awe of the tower," Sarita said calmly, shifting her brown-fringed shawl, perhaps to draw attention to it. Her dark, square face lacked the ageless look as yet, and she admitted yearning for it. "Only fools fail to stand in awe of the tower," Cariana said on Sarita's heels. A bulky woman, as wide in the shoulders as most men, the green had no need for gestures. Her coppery face proclaimed what she was to anyone who knew what to look for as loudly as did the ring on her right forefinger. "The word I hear," Gomyson said darkly, "is that Tarvalin is besieged. I hear the White Tower is split with two Amelins. I even hear the tower itself is held by the Black Aja." A brave man to mention that rumor to Aes Sedai, but he still flinched, saying it. Flinched and went right on. "Who is it you want us to be in awe of?" "Do not believe everything you hear, Captain Gomyson." Sarita's voice was serene, a woman stating indisputable fact. "Truth has more shadings than you might think, and distance often distorts truth into something very different from the facts. Lies about dark friends' sisters are dangerous to repeat, however. What you had best believe," Cariana added just as calmly, "is that the White Tower is the White Tower now and always, and you stand before three Aes Sedai. You should have care with your words, Captain." Gomyson scrubbed the back of a hand across his mouth, but his dark eyes held defiance. Hunted defiance. "I'm just saying what can be heard on any street," he muttered. "We're here to talk about the White Tower," Cordwin said, scowling. He emptied his wine cup before going on, as if this talk made him uneasy. How much had he already consumed? He seemed a trifle unsteady on his feet, and there was a touch of slur in his words. "The tower is hundreds of leagues from here, and what happens there is no business of ours." "True, friend," Bakovan said. "True. Our business is swords. Swords and blood. Which, my lady, brings us to the sordid matter of," he waggled thick, begemmed fingers, "gold. Every day we lose men, day after day with no end in sight, and there are very few suitable replacements to be found in the city." "Not at all that I've found," Cordwin muttered, eyeing the young maid filling his cup. She blushed at his scrutiny and finished her task quickly, spilling wine on the floor tiles and making Mistress Hartford frown. "Those that might have been are all signing up for the Queen's Guards." That was true enough. Enlistments seemed to increase by the day. The Queen's Guards would be a formidable force, eventually. Unfortunately, the vast majority of those men were months from being able to handle a sword without stabbing themselves in the foot, and further from being of any use in battle. "As you say, friend," Bakovan murmured. "As you say." He directed a wide smile at Elaine. Perhaps he meant to seem friendly, or maybe reasonable, but it minded her of a man trying to sell her a pig in a sack. "Even after we're done here, finding new men won't be easy, my lady. Suitable men aren't found under cabbage leaves, no, they're not. Fewer men means fewer coins for our next hires, an inescapable fact of the world. We think it's only just that we receive compensation." Anger surged in Elaine. They thought she was desperate to hold on to them, was what they thought. Worse, they were. These 3 men represented better than 1,000 more between them. Even with what Gaibon had brought her, that would be a grievous loss, especially if it started other mercenaries thinking her cause was lost. Mercenaries disliked being on the losing side. They would run like rats fleeing fire to avoid that. Her anger surged, but she held it in rein. By a hair's breadth. She could not keep the scorn from her voice, though. Did you think you would take no casualties? Did you expect to mount guard and take gold for it without bearing your swords? You signed for so much gold each day, Birgitta put in. She did not say how much, because every company had bargained for its own agreement. The last thing they needed was for the mercenary companies to grow jealous of each other. As it was, it seemed that half the common room fights the guards broke up were between men of different companies. A fixed amount. To put it cruelly, the more men you lose, the greater your profit. Ah, Captain General, the stout man said blandly, but you forget the death money that has to be paid to the widows and orphans. Gomyson made a choking noise, and Cordwin stared at Bakovan incredulously, then tried to cover it by draining his wine cup again. Elaine trembled, her hands tightening to fists on the arms of her chair. She would not give way to anger. She would not. I intend to hold you to your agreements, she said coldly. Well, at least she was not raging. You'll be paid what you signed for, including the usual victory gold after I gain the throne, but not a penny more. If you try to back out, I'll assume you are turning coat and going over to Aramilla, in which case I'll have you and your companies arrested and put outside the gates without swords or horses. The maid, refilling Cordwin's wine cup yet again, suddenly squealed and danced away from him, rubbing her hip. The anger Elaine had been holding down fountained white hot. And if one of you ever dares fondle one of my women, he and his company will be put out without swords, horses, or boots. Do I make myself clear? Very clear, my lady. Bakovan's voice held a distinct chill, and his wide mouth was tight. Very clear indeed. But now, since our discussion seems concluded, may we withdraw? Think carefully, Sarita said suddenly. Will the White Tower choose to see an Aes Sedai on the Lion Throne, or a fool like Aramilla Marn? Count the Aes Sedai in this palace, Cariana added. Count the Aes Sedai inside the kingdom. There are none in Aramilla's camps. Count and decide where the White Tower's favor lies. Count, Sarita said, and remember that the White Tower's displeasure can be fatal. It was very hard to believe that one of them must be Black Aja, yet it must be so. Unless it was Marililla, of course. Elaine hoped that was not so. She liked Marililla. But then she liked Cariana and Sarita, too. Not as much as she did Marililla, yet still a liking. Any way she looked at it, a woman she liked was a dark friend, and already under penalty of death. When the mercenaries had departed, making their courtesies hurriedly, and Mistress Harford had sent the maids away with the remnants of the wine, Elaine leaned back in her chair and sighed. I handled that very badly, didn't I? Mercenaries require a strong hand on the reins, Birgitta replied, but there was doubt in the bond, doubt and worry. If I may say, my lady, Norrie said in his dry voice, I cannot see anything else you could have done. Mildness would only have emboldened them to make further demands. He had been so still that Elaine had almost forgotten he was there. Blinking at the world, he seemed a wading bird, wondering where the water had gone. In contrast to Mistress Harford's neatness, ink stains marked his tabard and his fingers. She eyed the leather folder in his hands with distinct distaste. Will you leave us, please, Sarita, Cariana? She said. They hesitated slightly, but there was nothing they could do save bow their heads and glide from the room like swans. And you too as well, she added over her shoulder to the guardswoman. They did not so much as twitch. Outside, Birgitta snapped, with a jerk of her head that set her braids swaying. Now. Oh, the pair jumped for her, they did. They headed for the door so fast they might as well have trotted. Elaine scowled as the door closed behind them. Burn me, I don't want to hear any bloody bad news. Not today. I don't want to hear how much of the food brought in from Ilion and Tyr is already spoiled when it arrives. I don't want to hear about arson, or flour black with weevils, or sewers breeding rats faster than they can be killed, or flies so thick you'd think Camelin was a filthy stable. I want to hear some bloody good news for a change. Burn her? She sounded petulant. Truth be told, she felt petulant. Oh, how that grated! She was trying to gain a throne and behaving like a child in the nurseries. Master Nori and Mistress Harfor exchanged glances, which only made matters worse. He fondled his folder with a sigh of regret. The man enjoyed droning his numbers, even when they were dire. At least they no longer balked at giving their reports in company. Well, not very far. Jealous of their own responsibilities, each was wary of the other's straying, and quick to point out where some imagined boundary had been crossed. Still, they managed to run the palace and the city efficiently, with few barked knuckles. Are we private, my lady? Rena asked. Elaine drew a deep breath and performed novice exercises that seemed to have no calming effect whatsoever, then attempted to embrace the source. To her surprise, Saidar came to her easily, filling her with the sweetness of life and joy, and soothing her moods, too. It was always that way. Anger or sorrow or just being with child might interfere with embracing the power in the first place, yet once it filled her, her emotions stopped jumping about. Deftly she wove fire and air, just so, with traces of water, but when she was done, she did not release the source. The feel of being filled with the power was wondrous, yet not that much more so than knowing she would not be wanting to weep for no reason, or shout for as little in the next moment. After all, she was not foolish enough to draw too deeply. We are private, she said. Saidar touched her ward and was gone. Someone had tried to listen. Not the first time that had happened. With so many women who could channel gathered in the palace, it would have been surprising if no one attempted to snoop. But she wished she knew how to trace whoever was making those attempts. As it was, she hardly dared say anything of substance without a ward in place. Then I have a little good news, Mistress Harfor said, shifting her folder but not opening it. From John Skellet. The barber had been most assiduous about carrying his reports, approved beforehand by Rena, out to Aramilla and bringing back what he could learn in the camps outside the city. He was in the employ of Nayan Lorne, but Nayan supporting Aramilla's claim would surely share Skellet's reports with Aramilla. Unfortunately, what he'd been able to learn so far had not been of much use. He says that Aramilla and the high seats supporting her intend to be in the first party to ride into Camelin. She boasts of it constantly, it seems. Elaine sighed. Aramilla and the others stayed together, moving from camp to camp according to no pattern she could see, and for some time great effort had gone into trying to learn where they would be ahead of time. A simple matter, then, to send soldiers through a gateway to seize all of them at once and decapitate her opposition. As simple as such things could be, anyway. Men would die under the best of circumstances. Some of the high seats might well escape. Yet if only Aramilla herself could be taken, there would be an end to it. Elenia and Naon had made public renunciation.
All right, everyone, I'm gonna call into this live for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who keeps stopping by. I appreciate all y'all support. Until next time, everyone, y'all stay safe out there.